Hello and welcome, dear friends. In the first lecture of our course, here we start with Chapter 1 Foundation in Health and Safety.
The purpose of any development or any discovery to be an answer to a curious questions, either what or why or how. Our question here was, what is the problem that requires us to consider health and safety? So let's see. According to the statistics of the International Labour Organization, we find that every 15 seconds a worker dies from a work-related accident or disease. Every 15 seconds, 153 workers have a work-related accident. Every day, 6,300 people die as a result of occupational accident or work-related diseases. More than 2.3 million deaths per year. 317 million accidents occurs on the shop annually. 4% of global gross domestic product is lost every year through the cost of injury or death or even absence.
Now, the issue is that we are now in 2016. And although
daily science development and rapid progress of the technology used in different industries and production fields, and how the safety criteria is added in machines and power tools to preserve workers' and operators' life and keep them away from harm, we annually get this huge number of suffering cases. And these previous figures relate to a number of accidents and cases of diseases which are reported and recorded globally. And guess what? Not everything is reported or recorded, so the real figures are almost certainly higher. So now, can you imagine the size of the problem the world suffers from? Well, I think you do. But when this problem did appear, is it a recent or old issue? Let's find out. Research says that the Industrial Revolution was the start, when the transition to the new manufacturing processes. This transition included going from hand production methods to machines, and iron production processes, and the development of machines tools, and the rise of the factory system. This transition came with profits as well as huge human losses, as people were not familiar with machines. Also, women, children were hired in factories to operate machines. Huge number of workers got severe work-related injuries daily. Injuries and fatalities statistics make the world realize the size of the problem. In this moment, the world realized the need of working laws and legislations and labor organizations.
Well, that's all for today. Thanks for watching and see you later.
Hello and welcome, dear friends, in the second lecture of our course, Health and Safety Management System. So let's back with Chapter 1, Foundation in Health and Safety. In the first lecture, we knew what and when the problem started. And now, the topic of health and safety makes use of keywords and phrases. The following are some important definitions. First definition we have is health. What is meant by health? Well, simply it's the absence of disease or ill health. But it's not only related to the physical ill health, so don't misunderstand it, because it's also related to the psychological ill health. For example, asbestos, and it's a very dangerous substance we will get to know about later. Asbestos creates a health risk because if it's inhaled, it leads to a lung cancer. See, it's a physical ill health. And also exposure to extreme stress can lead to nervous breakdown. It's psychological ill health. Second definition we have is safety. Safety is absence of uncontrolled hazards and risk of a serious personal injury or equipment damage. For example, avoid walking under a load suspended from a crane during a lifting operation, result in a personal safety. Because if the load falls, a serious injury to this person or even death could be the result. Next definition we have is the welfare. Welfare is looking after people's basic needs by providing basic facilities such as toilets, hand wash stations, and restrooms, and also places where food can be prepared and eaten in relatively hygienic condition. And also basic first aid provision is kind of a welfare. Going to next definition, hazard. It's something with a potential to cause a loss or harm of any kind, either injury to person or damage to equipment. For example, electricity. Electricity can lead to explosion to any equipment or even an electric shock to the person. So see, the harm here is related to the equipment and the person. Also welding machine, noise and different type of machines. Also vehicles and ladders. So simply, anything around us can represent a hazard. Going to next definition, the risk. It is a combination of likelihood, or simply you can say the probability, of a harm to occur and the severity of that harm. Please remember that this harm could be injury to person or damage to equipment, so it's not only related to the human beings. For examples, working at height using a ladder, the worker may fall down or drop a hand tool equipment as a hammer. This is the probability of the harm. Falling can lead to broken bones, bruises, or even death. This is the severity of that harm. I hope it's clear of any confusion. Next definition we have is accident. It's an unwanted and unplanned event which result in loss or harm of any kind, such as injury to person or damage to equipment. For example, worker tripped over a cable. He fell down, result in breaking his leg. Next definition is occupational accident. It's an unwanted and unplanned event which result in loss or harm of any kind, such as injury to person or damage to equipment. Actually, it's the same definition of the accident, but the next phrase will make the difference. And it happens out or in the course of work. So this is a difference between the accident and the occupational accident. For example, Worker tripped over a cable inside the place of work. During his shift, he fell down and result in breaking his leg. In the meaning of out or in the course of work, actually it's not mandatory that the accident happen inside the place of work. Maybe he's out the workplace, such as a mission. This is recorded as an occupational injury. For example, purchasing employee has gone to a vendor to purchase a required material. On his way, he got a car accident and his hand broken. See, he's out of the workplace, his company. But this is during his working shift, and also it's a mission for the work. Then it's recorded an occupational injury. Next definition is the incident or the near miss. It's an unwanted and unplanned event which has the potential to result in loss or harm of any kind, such as injury to person or damage to equipment, but it didn't result of any loss at all. Please don't get confused between definitions because it's a small difference between it, so please pay attention. For example, a worker tripped over a cable. He fell down, but without any harm or loss at all to him. Next definition, dangerous occurrence. It's an unwanted and unplanned event which has the very high potential to result in a severe loss or harm of any kind, such as injury to person or damage to equipment, but it didn't result of any loss at all. For example, falling hammer from a scaffold missed the worker walking below without harm to him, as well as no damage to the hammer. So see, there is no harm to any kind, neither the person nor the hammer. I hope it's very clear. Next definition and last definition is the environmental protection. It's a measures used to prevent harm to environment of workplace to the surrounding of this organization, such as the air and water and land and natural resources. Well, that was a quick overview for most common definition. We hope that all clear for today. Thanks for watching and see you in next lecture. Hello and welcome, dear friends, in new lecture of our course Health and Safety Management System. We are still in Chapter 1, Foundation in Health and Safety. Last lecture, we learned most common definition, and today we jump to the next point. Although obvious health and safety problems are now clear, unfortunately there are a lot of work owners in some countries still asking, why should I manage health and safety in my workplace? And they try to ignore its importance. So today we are here to answer the question, telling the reason for maintaining good standard of health and safety. There are three main reasons: moral reasons, and legal and social reasons, and financial reasons. Let's study each reason one by one. First reason we have is the moral reason. Do you remember in our first lecture we spoke about the statistics published by the ILO that every 15 seconds a worker dies from a work-related accident or disease, and more than 2.3 million deaths per year, and about 317 million accidents occur on the job annually? Actually, the statistics above indicate that a huge amount of pain and suffering is experienced by people who simply go to work to earn a living. And the numbers indicate the scale of the problem. But what the numbers don't tell is the individual stories. When health and safety is not managed properly, people get killed and injured in horrible ways or suffer terrible diseases that have a massive impact not only on them but also their dependents, families, friends, and colleagues. Society as a whole considers these events to be morally unacceptable, and injury or ill health shouldn't be a price that has to be paid in order for the worker to feed their family. Employers provide their premises and equipment and put in place the working practices which employees use to produce the goods and services from which employers earn profits. To that extent, employers can be said to gain from the condition in the workplace, and in return, they provide an income for employees, but also have a moral responsibility, which is considered the duty of care. It's the duty and responsibility of the employer to care about people and protect people from any harm and prevent their suffering by providing a safe workplace. Second reason we have is the legal and social reasons. The social or legal reasons for managing health and safety relate to the framework of international and national laws that govern the conduct of business and organization. Most countries have laws that set standards for how organizations should conduct themselves with regard to health and safety. And failure to achieve this legal minimum standard can lead to enforcement action by the authorities or prosecution before the court. And successful prosecution can lead to a fine, and in many countries, to imprisonment for individuals concerned. Third reason we have is the financial reason. The business case for health and safety is simply that accidents and ill health cost money. When an accident occurs, that will be direct and indirect costs associated with that event. Some of these losses can be insured against, but many cannot. Accident and ill health can significantly affect the profitability of an organization and in some cases can put an organization out of the business. And when an accident occurs, there are two types of losses that the organization may face. First type is the direct costs. It's measurable costs arising directly from the accident. For example, fines in criminal courts and compensation to victim, first aid treatment, worker sick pay, repair or replacement for damaged equipment, lost or damaged product, and overtime costs for lost time. Second type of loss is the indirect costs. its costs are rising indirectly as consequences of the event. And these costs are often difficult to quantify precisely and may be hard to identify. For example, lost working time, cost and time for investigations, loss of staff morale, which impact productivity, replacement and retraining for injured worker, increased insurance premium, legal expenses such as lawyer fees, loss of business reputation. There is a study represented in the iceberg figure. It says that every £1 you pay as a direct cost, which is a visual cost you can identify and you can quantify, you pay on the other side from 8 to £36 as an indirect cost, which is a hidden cost you cannot quantify and you cannot identify. Well, that was the 3 reasons for maintaining good standard of health and safety. We hope it's clear now. Thanks for watching and see you next lecture. Hello and welcome, dear friends, in a new lecture of our course Health and Safety Management System. Let's continue with Chapter 1, Foundation in Health and Safety. Last lecture we learned main reasons to maintain good standard of health and safety. Today we discuss new point. Being in charge and responsible for health and safety in any organization, it requires you to know basic knowledge about laws, whether international or national law. Law is considered as a center which legislations and standards and company manuals or policies revolve around. We have 2 types of law, the civil law and the criminal law. Let's briefly know the difference between them. Civil law is the branch of law concerned with compensating individuals or organizations for loss or something wrong they suffered from. In other definition, we can say that the aim of the civil law is to compensate an individual or organization for loss suffered, such as injury, death, or damage to property. Second branch of the law is the criminal law. It aims to punish individual or organization for behaving in a way that the society decided is unacceptable. Punishments such as fines and imprisonment or even death. Next point you have to know is what is required to win a case of negligence of health and safety against the employer. There are 3 standard conditions required to win this case. First condition is the duty of care. You have to prove that it's the duty of the company to care about the claimant, who is the injured worker in this case, and protect them from any harm by providing safe workplace. For example, law enforces the employer to provide a welding technician with a welding mask for eye protection. So it's a proof now that it is the duty of care of the employer to provide the technician with this mask to protect him from the welding process. Second condition is to prove that this duty of care is breached, that the company didn't provide reasonable protection for the claimant. For example, the employer didn't provide welding technician with a welding mask for eye protection, and no signed record by the technician that he has received the PPE. Last condition to win the case is to prove that this breach caused the loss by an evidence such as a medical report that the loss suffered was caused directly by that breach. For example, welding technician suffered from welding process, causing him eyesight damage. Well, the conclusion of this lecture is that this information must be known to avoid any legal actions against your own business or the company you work for. That's all for today. Thanks for watching and see you in the next lecture. Hello and welcome, dear friends, in a new lecture of our course Health and Safety Management System. Today we are in the final lecture with Chapter 1, Foundation in Health and Safety. Last lecture we learned basic knowledge about law in order to avoid any legal actions. And the other point we need to know also is the frameworks for regulating our health and safety system. Actually, we have 3 basic frameworks, which are the European model and the American model and also the common model. Let's know the feature of each one. The European model or the goal-setting model. It allows flexibility in health and safety, allowing those responsible to use their knowledge of their activities to design the best control measure. In other words, you set a goal or target, and you choose the way you like to achieve this goal. The American model, or the prescriptive model. In this regime, the legislation is couched in terms of rules which must be followed. So it's very obvious that it's not flexible at all, as much as the European model. The common model, by the ILO, it produces conventions and recommendations, which set the international standards. The International Labour Organization (ILO) is a United Nations agency dealing with labor issues, particularly international labor standards and social protection. It's considered the prime mover in the area of international standards in health and safety, and most countries are members of the ILO. As mentioned previously, the primary outputs of the ILO are conventions and recommendations, which can form the basis of detailed legislation in each member country, and the result being the basic minimum health and safety standards are adopted. For example, in 1981, the ILO adopted the Occupational Safety and Health Convention C-155. It describes a basic policy for health and safety at both the national level and the level of the individual organization. Then the conclusion is there are no truly global legal standards governing workplace health and safety, and most countries have their own laws developed over years to tackle their own issues and concerns. However, countries often end up adopting similar basic approaches to protect the health and safety of their people. The detail may vary, but the underlying principles are the same. Last point in this chapter is source of health and safety information. Actually, information on national standards can be obtained from the relevant national regulatory bodies, who publish guidance documents which provide information on the legal standards required. So we have two sources of information. The internal sources, such as the company policy and manuals and work procedures. Also the risk assessment, which is a very, very important point in any workplace, and we will learn about it later. Also audits and inspection reports, and health and safety representative, such as the health and safety engineer or the health and safety manager or health and safety officer. Also accident and ill health and incident records. Through it we can highlight any new hazard or risk appear in the workplace. Then we can set control measures. Second source of information is the external sources. For example, the National Safety Organization in the country. Also suppliers and designers and manufacturers, when they mention the safety rules in the user manual. Also consultants and experts and the specialists. Also the internet and the international standards such as the OSHA and the HSE. Many of the regulatory bodies have websites which are valuable sources of information. These are some of the trusted websites. You can go on and check it. The International Labour Organization, the Occupational Safety and the Health Administration, the OSHA, the European Agency for Safety and Health at Work, and the Health and Safety Executive, and WorkSafe, it's a Western Australia. Well, at this point we are in the end of the Chapter 1, Foundation in Health and Safety, and we hope that learning points have been successfully achieved clearly. Thanks for watching and see you in the first lecture in Chapter 2. Hello and welcome dear friends in new lecture of our course Health and Safety Management System. Today we start first lecture with Chapter 2, Health and Safety Management Element 1, the policy. Chapter 1 was a general introduction about health and safety system, and today we start studying deep basic elements of health and safety management system. The management of workplace health and safety must be considered systematically within an organization in the same way as any other form of management system. A systematic approach to management is often linked to the Bedica cycle. P for plan, D for do, C for check, A for act. We will understand each step in this cycle one by one. Get to know that this general approach has been used in many management systems, including the ISO 9001 Quality Management System and the ISO 14001 Environmental Management System. Many different health and safety management systems using a similar format. For example, the OSAS 18001, which refers to Occupational Health and Safety Assessment Series. And we can summarize the key elements of this system as policy, organizing, planning, and implementation, evaluation, action for improvement, and audit. Let's start with element 1, the policy. Policy is a business plan for health and safety in order to prevent or reduce whether individual or organization loss or harm, also improve the safety and performance. And it has to be made to establish health and safety as a prime commitment of the management, particularly at the top level. A health and safety policy is usually presented in three parts. Part 1, the statement of intent. Part 2, the organization section. Part 3, the arrangement section. Let's study each part one by one. The general statement of intent outlines the importance that the organization places on health and safety and the commitment that can be expected. It also sets aims and objectives for the organization to achieve. For example, meeting legal obligations, provision of safe workplace, safe equipment and safe system of work, and also training and supervision. Also risk assessment of all relevant workplace activities, and also provision of adequate resources such as expert health and safety advice, and ensure effective communication and consultation with workers. It also general statement of intent must commit the organization to achieve legal compliance, and in many cases the commitment will be to achieving a higher standard than that set by the law. Bear in mind, the statement of intent should recognize that managers and workers at all levels within the organization have a part to play in implementing the policy, and it will therefore state very clearly that every person must comply with the policy, and that serious breaches of the policy may be treated as disciplinary offenses. For that, it must be signed by the person at the top of the organization, such as the chief executive officer, the CEO, or the manager, director, to authorize the policy and indicate that the policy commitment comes from the highest level. And it also must be dated to indicate when the current statement was prepared and provide a reference point of view. This section of health and safety policy deals with people and their operational duties in relation to health and safety. It outlines the chain of command for health and safety management and identifies the rules and responsibilities of staff to enable clear delegation of duties. It's a standard practice for the section to include an organization chart showing the lines of responsibility and accountability in terms of health and safety management. And this chart also shows the lines of communication and the feedback routes that exists within the organization for clear reporting. These figures show a typical organization chart for a company. The gray lines show line management responsibility. Flowing down through the structure, the green lines show the functional responsibility that the health and safety manager has for providing advice for all levels of the organization. The orange lines shows the lines of communication and feedback through the structure. Get to know that the organization section will usually reflect the management hierarchy within the organization and allocate responsibility accordingly. For example, the CEO or managing director ultimately responsible and accountable for the entire organization, and the management at all levels responsible for ensuring that all appropriate safety measures are in place and being carried out effectively. Also, all employees are responsible for acting safely at all times in the course of their duties at work. And the specialist health and safety practitioner responsible for providing advice to support management and employees in achieving safety. That's enough for this lecture today. Hope all information are clear. Thanks for watching and see you in next lecture. Hello and welcome dear friends in the new lecture of our course Health and Safety Management System. Today we are in the second and the last lecture with chapter 2, Health and Safety Management Element 1, the policy. Last lecture we spoke about two parts of the policy, and today we start with the last part, which is the arrangement section. The arrangement section is often the largest section of the policy. It deals with the general arrangement that exists to manage health and safety and the specific arrangement that are necessary to deal with particular risks relevant to the organization and its activities. All the general health and safety management issues will be relevant to all workplaces. They are generic issues and must be existed in any workplace. For example, carrying out the risk assessment and accident near-miss recording and investigations, developing safe system of work and control hazard, welfare and first aid provisions, good housekeeping, fire safety, and emergency procedures. On the other side, there are specific health and safety arrangements depending on the workplace activity. It will also have to be developed to deal with the particular risks. For example, lone working, we will get to know about later, noise exposure control, vibration exposure control, toxic material and exposure control, and hot works. Please get to know that not all organizations will have all of these risks. These are specific to the organization and its function. Control of exposure may require health surveillance and PPE, the use and maintenance of which should be covered in the arrangements.
There are various number of companies around the world that know about health and safety management system, and they do implement a health and safety policy. However, you find it ineffective, unfortunately. The question is, what can lead to ineffective health and safety policy in any workplace? Actually, there are many causes can lead to ineffective health and safety policy. For example, you find no management commitment towards health and safety. You can find managers are not leading by example, and they don't do what they are asking the employees to do. Also, no smart objectives set to implement policy, and there are nothing for the employees to aim for, and there is no follow-up. Aims and objectives not clearly understood by employees, and they will not be able to implement the policy. Also, health and safety not given the priority against other business needs, like production. Also, poor channels of communication and low morale for employees and inadequate resources to implement actions. All these causes can lead to ineffective health and safety policy. Last point in this chapter is the reviewing the policy. What might require the company to review the policy? Actually, health and safety policy shouldn't be considered as a rigid and unchanging. Instead, it should be subject to regular review so that it remains current and relevant. In this way, it can be kept a live document. And it's a good practice to review the policy on a regular basis, because the aim of the review is to make sure that the policy is up to date and accurate. And the date of the previous review should be recorded on the policy document to indicate how currently they are. And get to know that there are other conditions which might require a review of the policy. For example, if the policy is no longer valid, and this is after a major or repeated accident or ill health. Also after a major change, such as technological change, introduction of new plant or process, or organizational change, like change of the key personnel such as the new CEO, or change to the management structure of the organization. Also legally changed, such as the introduction of new legislation application to the organization. Also as a result of monitoring or reviewing performance, such as audit or investigation or risk assessment that suggests the policy is no longer effective and must be reviewed. Or in general, after the passage of time, like an annual review is a common practice.
Well, here's the end of chapter 2, Health and Safety Management Element 1, the policy. We hope that the learning objective have been successfully achieved clearly. Thanks for watching and see you in the first lecture in chapter 3. Welcome dear friends in the new lecture of our course Health and Safety Management System. Today we start the first lecture with chapter 3, Health and Safety Management Element 2, the organizing. In chapter 2 we finished studying about the element 1, the policy, and here the second element in the management system, which is the organizing. This element correlates directly to the first step of the Pediga cycle, referred to the start in the chapter 2, plan, do, check and act. So we are in the step of the plan. The organizing element deals with people and their operational duties in relation to health and safety. It also identifies the health and safety rules and responsibilities of everyone in the company. So let's start with the rules and responsibilities or duties of the employer. Look back at chapter 1 and remind yourself of the duty of care, which were providing safe workplace to protect workers from any harm or suffer, providing welfare facilities such as restrooms and toilets, consultation with workers about work and getting the feedback from them about the work, provide adequate working resources, and provide emergency procedures such as fire safety and evacuation plan and first aid. Also provide a suitable PPE, the personal protective equipment, and provide full information and the training and the instruction and also supervision of the job they do. Second point, we need to define the employees, the roles and the responsibilities, as the employer provide them with the duty of care. So they also have a duty of care towards themselves and their colleagues, by not to put themselves or their colleagues at risk. Also, they should use welfare facilities in good way and keep them in good condition, and cooperate actively with each other and their employer by reporting any incident or accident happening in the workplace. Also follow the emergency procedures and participate in any practice or drills planned by the employer, and using the PPE and equipment in good way and maintain them and keep them in a good condition. Third rule, related to the supplier and designers and the manufacturers. They should ensure equipment and the substance are safe when being used and stored or even transported, and deliver the products on time according to the client's specifications, and carry out necessary tests, continuous researches, and update the client, and provide adequate information about the product, like the MSDS we will get to know about later, and provide training and maintenance services if needed, and take reasonable steps to provide further information if new serious risks appear. Next rule belongs to the safety specialist or the advisor in the workplace, who can be the safety engineer, the safety officer, or the manager. Remember in chapter 2 when we mentioned that he must provide advice and guidance on health and safety standards in all levels of the organization, and he should promote a health and safety culture in the workplace, developing and implementing policy, monitoring health and safety performance in the workplace, overseeing accident reporting and investigations, and identifying training needs in the workplace, overseeing the development and adequate risk assessment, and have a good communication skills and good relation inside and outside the organization. Last point we have today is the rules and responsibilities of the contractor. Contractors are responsible for their own health and safety and the health and safety of others who might be affected by their work activities. For example, a contractor might be held responsible if they bring an unsafe power tool into a client's factory and they injure themselves or one of the client's employees or a visitor. And as we noted earlier, a client as an employer is responsible for the health and safety of his employees and the visitors. This responsibility is shared between the client and the contractor. And if a client can be held responsible for the injury caused by the contractor working for the client, then it must be in the client's own best interest to ensure that contractors do not endanger workers or others. And it requires a kind of management of contractor, which can be broken into the following key areas. Starting with the selection of the right contractors, according to many factors, going through planning the work with the contractor by deciding the scope of work and duration of the job and numbers and type of equipment and tools used in the job, and policies and standards used in the job. And also control the contractors on the site by keeping open channels of communication with the contractor, such as the radio or phone calls or emails, or having a client representative on site with the contractor. Also checking the contractor's work by measuring the performance of the contractor, by carrying out a regular audits or inspection by competent people. And last thing is review the contractor's performance by producing action plan with recommendation for improvement, assign it to responsible person to be followed up within a time frame. So let's go back in factors we should consider in selecting the contractors. We should check for the previous experience in the type of work and the industry they do, to make sure they have done the work before safely and effectively. We have to make sure that they have a good reputation among previous or current customers, and if they have any enforcement reports and any legal actions taken against them, and a copy of their safety and health policy, and the quality of the risk assessment, and the qualifications and the training records of workers they have. Also, if they are a membership of a professional bodies, such as the ISO, and if they have any records of maintenance and test for them plant and equipment. Also, the accident and the incident and ill health record of them. Here we are at the end of this lecture today. Thanks for watching and see you next lecture. Hello and welcome dear friends in new lecture of our course Health and Safety Management System. We're still chapter 3, Health and Safety Management, element number 2, the organizing. First lecture we introduced the health and safety rules and responsibilities of everyone in the company, and today we start with a very important topic about the health and safety culture. All organizations have a culture which is not written down or even easily stated. It's a mix of formal and informal rules, relationships, values, and the customs which taken together and describe the feel of the organization. And the organizational culture is the characteristic of the organization that exists at every level, from senior management to the shop floor workers. And no one person determines the culture of the organization, but all staff working for the organization determine it collectively. So we define health and safety culture as it's the way that everyone within the organization think and feel about health and safety, and how this translates into their behavior. In other words, we can define it as it's the way safety is recognized, valued, and prioritized in the organization, indicating how the organization or persons behave when no one is watching. To understand it more, we need to know the relation between safety culture and performance in any organization. An organization will have either a positive safety culture or a negative one. In an organization with a positive safety culture, the majority of workers think and feel that health and safety is important. There is a strong policy and clear leadership from the top because senior management have this attitude, which runs through the whole organization from top to bottom. In an organization like this, you can see there is a clear link between safety culture and health and safety performance. People work safely, so there will be fewer accidents and less ill health. Also, there will be no delay in the production process, or no damage and no absence, and high morale to work. On the opposite side, in an organization with a negative safety culture, the majority of workers think that health and safety is not important. They are poorly educated in health and safety and see it's unnecessary or unimportant. And there is a lack of clear direction and leadership from senior management, and the manager don't think about health and safety in their decision making, and so let other priorities dictate their actions. And workers behave unsafely often because they don't know any better. So you will find a large number of accident and ill health rate, and delay in production process and equipment damage, and the high absence rate. Actually, there are many factors lead to this negative culture, and we must avoid. For example, the job insecurity, and lack of management commitment to health and safety. Also poor management decision making, and lack of supervision, or lack of working resources, such as hand tools and equipment. The conclusion of our lecture is the positive culture will take the business up, while negative culture will for sure take the business down. Here's the end of our lecture for today. Thanks for watching and see you next lecture. Hello and welcome, dear friends, in a new lecture of our course, Health and Safety Management System. We are still with Chapter 3, Health and Safety Management, Element 2, the organizing. Last lecture we introduced health and safety culture and how it can affect the performance of the workplace. And today we continue with the important point, which is the safety-related behavior and factors influencing it. One issue of critical importance of health and safety management is the way that individual workers behave. It's estimated that over half of all workplace accidents are caused by unsafe acts and the poor safety-related behavior of the worker. And we must look at how human factors influence working practice. So why is the worker behaves safely at work, but another does not, even though working conditions for both workers are the same? And why is that worker behaves safely doing one job, but then unsafe practices start to creep into their behavior when they are switched to another job? And why is that worker behave poorly when working for one organization, but then leaves and starts to work for another company and behaves in an entirely different manner? The answers to these three questions and the link between them is the human factors. This refers to a range of issues that influence a person's safety-related behavior. These issues can be grouped under three main headings: organizational factors, which are the characteristics of the organization that they are working for, and job factors, which are the characteristics of the job and task they are performing, and last thing is the individual factors, which are the characteristics of the individual. Let's look at each factor in greater detail, starting with organizational factors, which are the characteristics of the organization that influence workers' behavior. For example, safety culture of the organization and the way that this culture is gradually absorbed by the individuals, policies and procedures, and the way that they might encourage or discourage good safety-related behavior. Also commitment and leadership from the management, and levels of supervision, which are the presence or absence and the competence of the supervision. Also consultation and the worker involvement in the management of health and safety issues and in the decision-making process. Either resources are a very important factor, which define the availability of unnecessary equipment like machine guards or the personal protective equipment. Also training point and how good the organization is identifying health and safety training needs and opportunities. Going to last factor, the peer group pressure. When people are put together into groups, they interact, and some individuals will have a lot of influence over the group, and others will have a little influence. And the certain ways of behaving will become the norm, which will often be established by the more influential members of the group. And a person wishing to become a member of this group will have to comply with the group norms. This pressure to comply with group norms is the peer group pressure. And actually, it's a very important factor to take into account when thinking about safety-related behavior. Because if a group is already working safely, then peer group pressure will keep most people in that group in line. But if the group is working unsafely, then peer group pressure will tend to force more and more workers to behave unsafely in an attempt to fit with group norms. The way to deal with this problem is usually to tackle the influential people within the group who are the ones responsible for establishing group behavior. If their behavior can be changed, then everyone else will change as well. Next group in the factors is the job factors, which are the characteristics of the worker's job that influence their safety-related behavior and may involve the task itself, in particular, the ergonomic requirement. For example, if a worker needs to bend when carrying out a task, then that task needs to be adapted to best suit that the worker concerned. And in the absence of the ergonomic design, workers will find the most comfortable way of working, and this may not be the safest way. Also the workload and the amount of work and rate of work and deadlines and the variety of work that individuals have to cope with. Also environment condition, that the workplace conditions such as space, lighting, noise and temperature, and the humidity, and the way that these parameters are controlled so as to minimize their impact on the worker's performance. For example, workers in a steel foundry in a high temperature environment, there is the potential for dehydration, heat stress and heat stroke. Also displays and controls, and how, if it's poorly designed, can contribute to the likelihood of the human error. Procedures factor and the existence and the quality of the working procedures, or lack of written procedures or poorly written procedures that are out of date or over complex or impractical can be why the workers don't comply with. Last group is the individual factors. Actually, people bring to their job their own personal mix of skills and knowledge, experience, attitudes, motivations, habits, and personality. These individuals' characteristics influence behavior in complex and significant ways. For example, the physical characters like age, height, health condition, disability, and sensory defect. Also social and cultural characters like language, level of education, health and safety culture, and religious beliefs. Also some of them are related to the person's psychological characters, such as motivation and the attitude, which is a person's point of view or the way of looking at something and how they think and feel about it. Either competence factor, which is the combination of the knowledge, experience, and the training, and the ability that brings a person to where they are able to perform to an acceptable standard, and they are aware of their own limitations. Here's the end of our lecture. I wish everything are clear. Thanks for watching, and see you in next lecture. Hello and welcome, dear friends, in a new lecture of our course Health and Safety Management System. We are still with Chapter 3, Health and Safety Management, Element 2, the Organizing. Last lecture, we discussed the three main groups that influence safety-related behavior: organizational and job and the individual factors. And today, we continue with the last point, related to the individual factors, the motivation and the role it plays. In the context of health and safety, it's important to understand a worker's motivation for carrying out their work in a safe or unsafe way, because that motivation can then be changed. Workers often behave unsafely, not simply because they are willful, but because they perceive a reward and they think that the risk is worth the reward, and their unsafe behavior is incentivized. From this, we can define the motivation as it's the driving force behind the way a person acts in order to achieve a goal. And actually, any reward scheme in the workplace that is intended to improve safety must be carefully thought through to ensure that it will incentive the right kind of behavior. For example, some workplaces pay a bonus related to the number of accidents recorded over a period of time. Fewer accidents means bigger bonus. This sounds actually like a good idea because it should make people work more safely so that they have fewer accidents and so they get a bigger bonus. But what more can motivate people, or how to promote safety behavior, and how to improve the safety performance in the workplace? Actually, these three questions have the same answer, which can be, for example, establishing a rewarding scheme or bonus to encourage workers to comply with safe procedures and behave safely. Also, open discussions or effective communication and consultation and getting the feedback from the workers, and involving the employees in different health and safety activities to gain knowledge and experience. For example, participating in health and safety committee and other safety activities. Other way is to facilitate the work by providing the better resources like funding, time, suitable and easier tools and equipment. Also establishing a no-blame culture within the organization, so the employees will be encouraged to participate in the safety and report accident and near misses without being afraid of punishment. And giving the priority to safety by making everyone know that safety is first and give them the authority to stop any unsafe operation. You also can motivate them by showing the management commitment, and manager should be leading by example and doing what they are asking the employees to do. And provide training and information for employees at all levels about the benefits of positive culture and consequences of a poor safety culture, and training on how to do the job safely and clear instructions and adequate supervision. And in this point, we need to look at a greater detail. Training is considered as essential to the management of health and safety in the workplace, and employers have a responsibility to train their staff to carry out their job in a safe manner. And the training is a key component of the competence, and in the absence of training, it's difficult to develop and demonstrate competence, and as a result, statute law in many countries requires employers to provide appropriate training for their workers. And the reason for this requirement is simple. Training has a dramatic effect on safety-related behavior, and without training, workers try to do their jobs to the best of their ability, but they do so either by informally copying others, including copying all the bad habits and unsafe working practices they see, or by doing the job the way that they think is the best. So there are some training opportunities the employer must provide to the employees, such as new employees induction training. This allows the worker to obtain knowledge about the organization in a safe, structured manner and ensure that critical information is delivered and understood. Job change training opportunity. Additional training is necessary when a worker's job change in a such way that they are exposed to new hazards and risks. And also a process change. When the way in which the worker is done change, workers may be exposed to new hazards and risks that require additional training. For example, when a different product is being produced on an existing piece of machinery, this may create new risks that require training in new safe operating procedures. Also, when new technologies adopted by organizations create different hazards and risks that worker may be unfamiliar with. And when there is a change to the law governing a particular health and safety issue, often create a need to train workers. There are special arrangements and supervisions and trainings are demanded for young workers, as they are at more risks because of lack of enough experience and training, and they are not fully developed yet, neither mentally nor physically, and they are more likely to take risks, perceiving risks as exciting rather than a dangerous matter, and they are easily responding to peer group pressure, and they are being highly motivated and over-enthusiastic and highly active and full of energy. Well, that's all for today. Thanks for watching and see you in the next lecture. Policy document or operation instructions and risk assessment. This method has some advantages, such as it can be referred back to a reliable reference, such as the OSHA or the HSE. Also, jargon's abbreviation can be carefully avoided, and it can be printed and distributed to a wide audience, and relatively cheap. Unfortunately, this method has also some limitations, that it takes time to write and prepare, and it may contain jargons or abbreviations, and message may not be read by the workers, and language barrier may be existed, and hard to get the feedback from the employees. Jargons are the special words or expressions used by professionals or group that are difficult for others to understand. Verbal communication using the spoken word, like face-to-face conversations, meeting, interviews, or training sessions by telephone or over a public announcement system. This is the easiest and most commonly used form of communication, as there is a direct contact between the sender and the recipient, and easy to get the feedback, and also exchanging of the point of view, and ensure the understanding. But there are also various weaknesses associated with this method, that jargons may not be understood, or message may not be read by the audience, and language barrier may be existed. Also, recipient may miss or forget the information. Also, noise or the spoken accent may interfere. The graphic communication using pictures, symbols, or pictograms like safety signs such as fire exit signs or hazard warning symbols. This method is also commonly used. It's quick to interpret and also eye-catching and no language barrier and jargon-free and convey message to wide audience. For the limitations, it can only convey a simple message and more expensive to buy or produce and may be ignored by workers and no feedback. Well, now we know the most common method of communication can be used. And here is the end of our lecture as well. Thanks for watching and see you in the next lecture. Hello and welcome dear friends, a new lecture of our course Health and Safety Management System. Finally, with the last lecture in Chapter 3, Health and Safety Management Element 2, the organizing. Today we learn about the emergency procedures and the needed arrangement. Despite all the controls that can be introduced into an organization, things can still go wrong, and accidents and incidents do happen. When they do, it's critical that the organization has emergency procedures that can be brought into effect without delay. Otherwise, there may be a poor and inappropriate response that makes things worse rather than better. Such incidents like fire, bomb threat, spillage of a hazardous material, and release of a toxic gas, or outbreak of disease, or severe weather or flooding. Once the organization has identified the expected incident, it should make internal arrangement to deal with each of them. And these arrangements should include procedures to be followed. In the event of fire, for example, normal practice is for workers to exit the building using the signed escape routes and assemble at a designated place. Also, provision of suitable equipment. If there is a chemical spill, for example, absorbent granules might be used to contain the spill and PPE used to prevent harm to those involved in the containment operation. Also, nomination of responsible staff. In a fire situation, for example, there is likely to be a need for fire wardens or marshals who walk through the building to check that everyone is aware of the fire evacuation. Also, provision of training and information. Workers will only know what to do when these various emergencies occur if they have been provided with information and training. Either drills and exercises, emergency procedures should be practiced to ensure that people are familiar with the actions they might be expected to take. And while internal emergency arrangement must be made by the organization to deal with foreseeable incident, this response will normally also involve contacting external emergency services for help. There should therefore be appropriate arrangement in the place, such as communication equipment like the landline and mobile phones or the satellite phone. Also, contact details such as national and local emergency service numbers, and responsible individuals with the necessary information and the knowledge nominated to make the call. Going to the last point in this chapter, which is the first aid. The basic rule of the first aiders is to keep the injured casualty alive until professional medical assistance can take over, and this sometimes referred to as 3 Ps: preserve life, prevent deterioration, and promote recovery. First aider also provides simple treatment for minor injuries that don't require a professional treatment. And in most workplaces, a number of personnel should be trained to a higher standard so that they can be considered as a first aiders. And when determining the number of first aiders to provide in the workplace, the employer would need to consider the number of the workers on the site and the distribution of workers, and also the shift pattern, and make sure that adequate cover must be provided for all shifts, and assure the need to provide first aid cover during absence, such as the holidays and during illness. And as a minimum, one fully stocked first aid kit must be provided for a small or low-risk workplace, and in larger workplace, multiple first aid kits should be positioned at various locations in the workplace. Well, here's the end of Chapter 3, Health and Safety Management Element 2, the organizing. We hope that learning objectives have been successfully achieved clearly. Thanks for watching and see you in the first lecture in Chapter 4. Welcome dear friends, a new lecture of our course Health and Safety Management System. Today we are with the first lecture in Chapter 4, Health and Safety Management Element 3, Planning and Implementation. Ended last chapter with health and safety rules and responsibilities in the workplace and how to improve the safety culture and the safety related behavior. And going to the third element in the safety and the health management system, planning and implementing. This element correlates directly with the first two parts of the Pediga cycle we referred to at last elements, which is plan, do, check and act. Health and safety must be managed systematically, and to achieve this, a system should be in place to identify and implement and maintain occupational health and safety requirements. And this requires planning so that specific objectives can be set for an organization to achieve. Also, specific processes can be put in place to allow the organization to achieve those objectives. And when health and safety objectives are set for an organization, those objectives should be SMART. Those acronym SMART refers to idea that objective should be. It should be specific, a clearly defined and precise objective. Also, it must be measurable. It's possible to measure achievement of the target, and usually by quantifying the objective. It must be achievable, that it can be done, and it must be reasonable within the time scale set and with the resources allocated. and a time bound that a deadline or time scale is set for completion of the objective. Think about the two following objectives. Improve the safety culture of the organization. As you can see, this objective is not a SMART objective. It doesn't identify a precise target to be achieved. Second objective, review all 48 risk assessments with a 12-month period. Here you can see it's a SMART objective, since the target is precisely defined and a number is given that allows easy measurement of the success and a time scale has been allocated. And when you set health and safety objective, you should consider the following. Who is going to set the objectives, which is the involvement of senior management, perhaps with guidance from health and safety practitioners or advisors, and how the objectives will be set at each functional level. Objectives need to be set at different levels within different parts of the organization to achieve organizational goals, and all objectives should be recorded so that they can be reviewed at the appropriate time. Also, legal and other requirements and hazards and risks inherent in the workplace, and the technological options. As the technology changes, organizations should take advantage of that new technology and set objectives accordingly. Also, financial, operational, and business requirements that health and safety objectives should in target with the financial, operational, and business objectives so that there is no conflict of goals. Well, that's all points for today in this lecture. Thanks for watching and see you in the next lecture. Hello and welcome, dear friends, in new lecture of our course, Health and Safety Management System. We are with second lecture in Chapter 4, Health and Safety Management Element 3, Planning and Implementation. Last lecture we identified the SMART objectives and how it should be. And today we are going to learn about a very important point in Health and Safety Management System, which is the risk assessment. Actually, risk assessment is a process that people do automatically all the time. When you cross the road, you can carry out a risk assessment, and when you drive a car, you carry out a risk assessment, and when you boil a kettle, you carry out a risk assessment. But of course, this assessment is normally done very quickly and without conscious thought of effort. And if you are not very good at this process, then you will not live long. So, in the workplace, the risk assessment is simply an extension of this automatic self-preservation mechanism. So, it's the process of identifying hazards, assessing the risk arising from these hazards, then you check the existing control measures, and decide if additional controls are needed. And the aim of the risk assessment is to ensure that hazards are eliminated or risks minimized by the correct application of relevant standards. And the objective of the risk assessment are to prevent death and personal injury, also other types of loss incidents, even near misses and ill health incidents, and also the breach of statute law, which might lead to enforcement actions, and the direct and indirect costs that follow on farm accidents. These objectives relate directly to the moral, legal, and the economic argument we discussed in the Element 1, the policy. Accident ratios, often referred to as accident triangles, display the relationship between numbers of accidents with different outcomes. Research show that this relation form a triangle, with the most serious outcome being least numerous at the top, and those with proportionally higher numbers but less serious results forming the base. The important message of the accident triangle is that serious outcome accidents tend to happen rarely and randomly, and they are difficult to predict because if they were not, it would be easy to prevent them from happening. Also, near misses incidents, on the other hand, happen far more frequently. As you see, 600 times more frequently according to the triangle. Many near misses will be minor events of little or no consequence. If they happen again, there would be no serious outcome, but some near misses will have the potential for very serious injury. These near misses should be thoroughly investigated and preventive measures put in place. In this way, a serious outcome incident is prevented. And you can also see that a near miss event from the bottom of the triangle, they form the greatest proportion of incidents. And get to know that accident ratio studies are based on statistical ratios. They cannot be used to predict exactly when a certain type of event might occur. For example, just because an organization has had 600 near misses or incidents reported doesn't mean that very next type of event will be a seriously injury accident. That's an oversimplification of the accident triangle. The risk assessments should be carried out by competent people. In this context, the word competent would mean people who have sufficient training, knowledge, and experience and other abilities. The exact training, knowledge, and experience required will vary depending on circumstances. For example, sometimes simply an ability to identify, read, and correctly interpret guidance on a topic is sufficient, and in other time, a detailed understanding of background knowledge is essential to be able to correctly evaluate the risk. But which case is better? To carry out a risk assessment individually or by a team? Actually, a risk assessment can be carried out by one person, but this is not ideal in many instances, since it relies on one person's opinion and judgment. And ideally, risk assessment will be carried out by a team, because this allows various views and opinions to be taken into account, and so many result in a more successful assessment. And this team might include workers familiar with the tasks and areas to be assessed, also health and safety specialists such as the safety practitioners, and the technical specialists such as mechanical and electrical engineers, also line managers responsible for the task of areas being assessed, and the work safety representative in the workplace. And after the completion of this team, there is one remaining question, which is, what is the criteria to carry out a risk assessment? Actually, a risk assessment should be suitable and sufficient, and in other words, it should be good enough to fulfill legal requirements and prevent foreseeable injuries and ill health from happening. So it should state the name and the competence of the assessor and any additional specialists' help obtained in carrying out the assessment. Also, it should identify the significant hazards and risks arising or connected with the work, which are most likely to occur and result in harm being caused. Either identify all those persons who could be at risk, including workers and others such as visitors and vulnerable people, such as young person, as well evaluate the effectiveness of the current controls and identify if other protective measures are required to control the risk to an acceptable level. And all these findings must be recorded. Last thing, that it should state the period of time for which it's likely to remain valid. Well, that's enough for today, and we continue in the next lecture with the risk assessment point still. Thanks for watching, and see you next lecture. Hello and welcome, dear friends, in new lecture of our course, Health and Safety Management System. Still with Chapter 4, Health and Safety Management Element 3, Planning and Implementation. Last lecture we started learning about the risk assessment. We learned the definition and the objectives and who is ideal to carry out the risk assessment and the criteria of it. And today we continue with the next point of the steps to carry out the risk assessment. Risk assessment can be described as a 5-step process, which are identifying the hazards, and identify people who might be harmed and how, and evaluate the risk and the control measures, and record findings and review and update the assessment. So let's look at each step in more detail. Identifying hazards is the first step in the risk assessment process, and it's to identify all the significant hazards associated with the work. And remember that hazards are the things with the potential to cause harm, and it's important to identify both the safety hazards that might give rise to immediate physical injury, such as moving parts of machinery or vehicles, and the health hazards that might cause diseases or ill health, such as asbestos or loud noise. And remember that the risk assessment is a tool for identifying all the significant hazards that exist in the workplace, and all the things that have the potential to cause harm. And it's not only a tool for only identifying those hazards that are poorly controlled. And there are various methods that might be used to identify hazards in a workplace. For example, inspections. The formal inspection can reveal the various hazards that are present and need to be considered in the risk assessment. Also, task analysis. This is a useful method to identify hazards, since it allows hazards to be spotted before work starts, rather than after the work has started. Task analysis involves breaking a job down into component steps and identifying the hazards associated with each step, so that the safe working method can then be established to deal with each hazard. As well, legislations. That knowledge of the legal standards that apply to a particular workplace will help enormously in identifying significant hazards. For example, knowledge of the law relating to work at height will allow a competent assessor to identify which tasks might be defined as work at height and which can be ignored. Manufacturer's information either. When a new item of plant, machinery, or equipment is purchased, it usually comes with an instruction book, which contains information about all the related hazards and instruction for safe use, cleaning, and maintenance. Similarly, when a new substance is purchased, it comes with labels and material safety data sheet, the MSDS, which clearly identifies the hazard of the substance. And also incident data. Internal accident and near misses data can be useful in identifying hazards. The main limitation here is that a hazard may be very significant, but may not yet have caused harm in the organization, and it may therefore go unnoticed. And also external data, such as national statistics published by the authorities, can be more useful since they identify the real hazards and risks based on much larger population size. Next step in the process is identifying people who might be harmed and how. And when identifying people at risk, think not only of those carrying out the particular activities, but also of those who may be affected by those activities. And they might be workers or operators, may be directly involved with the activity and working nearby or passing by some hazards create a risk. Also, maintenance staff are often involved in the removal of the usual safeguards present in the workplace because of the nature of maintenance works. For example, the lift engineer who has to climb onto the top of a lift carriage in the lift shaft, or the engineer who has to remove machine guards to repair a breakdown. Also, cleaners may be exposed to greater risk because cleaning work may involve the removal of the safeguard or additional activities that creates additional risks, such as window cleaning from an access cradle. Also, contractors may be carrying out work independent of the work being carried out by employees, or may be working alongside employees. The workplace creates risks for these contractors, and the contractors create risks for the workplace. As well, visitors to the workplace may not be working but are still exposed to a certain type of risk. Also, members of the public may simply be in the vicinity of the workplace, yet still affected by certain type of hazards. For example, a release of toxic chlorine gas from an industrial site will affect passers and those who live near the site. Here's the end of this lecture. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next lecture. Hello and welcome dear friends in new lecture of our course Health and Safety Management System. Still with chapter 4, Health and Safety Management Element 3, Planning and Implementation. Last lecture we started the first two steps in the risk assessment process, and today we continue with the third step, which is evaluate the risk and the control measures. Actually, the aim of this step is to answer a simple question. Is the level of risk generated by the hazard acceptable, or does it need to be reduced? The question may be simple, but the answer can be at times be complex. Remember that risk is the combination of the likelihood that a hazard will cause a harm and the expected severity of the injury. And risk can be described using three words: high, medium, and low. But the problem with these words is that they mean different things to different people, and so they are not used consistently. An alternative approach that is commonly adopted is to break risk down into its two components and define each separately using the calculation formula, multiplying likelihood by the severity. And by simply assigning a score to each word, it's possible to calculate a risk rating for a particular hazard and assign our risk assessment matrix. Look at this example for the risk assessment matrix. As you see, likelihood is presented on the x-axis, while severity is presented on the y-axis. And this graphic demonstrates how risk levels can be categorized using numbers and color coding. For green, identifying low risk, and for red, identifies high risk, while yellow and orange identify medium risk. So let's see an example to understand more. Here we have a worker is working at height using a ladder. So let's see how the risk can locate at low stage or medium stage or the high risk stage according to different conditions. And according to this condition, we can give the likelihood score a number out of 5, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. Also the severity, we can give it a score, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. So let's see the first condition. Suppose the worker is using a suitable ladder with a good mechanical conditions. This ladder is clean and dry, and the ladder is erected stable, and this worker is trained on his job. This worker is subjected to a falling hazard. This condition is an ideal condition, so the score of the likelihood will be 1. According to this falling hazard, the severity can be broken bones or bruises or even death, so we will give it a constant score in all conditions, which is 4 out of 5. Now to calculate the risk, we should use the calculation formula. So we can multiply the likelihood by the severity. In this condition, the likelihood equals 1, while the severity equals 4, and the result is 4. See? The risk here is in the green zone, which represents the low risk. Going to the second condition. Suppose the worker is using a suitable ladder with a good mechanical conditions, but this ladder is not clean and not dry, and the ladder is erected stable, but the worker is not trained on his job. Then, the score for the likelihood in this condition is 2, while we agreed that the score of the severity remains 4. In this case, the risk is in the yellow zone, which represents the medium risk. Third condition, that the worker is not using a suitable ladder with a bad mechanical condition, and this ladder is not clean and not dry, and ladder is not erected stable, and this worker is not trained on the job. Then the score for the likelihood in this case, we can give it 5, while severity score still 4. Then the result is the risk is in the red zone, which represents the high risk. The conclusion from our example is that control on a specific risk is the factor which results in the location of the risk, and ignoring controls by the time can raise the risk to the upper stage from the low to the medium to the high, and also get to know that zero risk are none. I wish you got it clear. Here's the end of our lecture. Thanks for watching, and see you in next lecture. Hello and welcome dear friends in new lecture of our course Health and Safety Management System. Still chapter 4, Health and Safety Management Element 3, Planning and Implementation. Last lecture we finished the third step of the risk assessment process and evaluate the risk and the control measures. And we know how to calculate the risk using the risk matrix. And today we continue with step 4 of the risk assessment process, which is recording the findings. The significant findings of the risk assessment should be recorded to provide a statement of the hazards in the workplace and the extent of the risks that they present and the action taken to control those risks. And there are no standard format for the risk assessment, so different organizations can adopt a format that is most appropriate to their circumstances. The typical content would include identification of the activity or the area assessed and of the significant hazards. Also identification of the group at the risk and those especially at the risk, and the evaluation of the risks and the adequacy of the existing control measures, and actions planned for implementing further precautions needed, and the data of the assessment and the name of the competent person carrying out the assessment, also the review date. There are times when a risk assessment has to focus on one person or one specific group of workers because they are more vulnerable to particular hazards or they are at more risk. For example, young persons or pregnant women or women who are nursing, also disabled workers and lone workers. Lone workers are people who work entirely on their own for periods of time, or those who are not alone but are not with colleagues on whom they can rely for help. For example, a service engineer who spends 4 hours alone in a plant room servicing machinery is considered a lone worker. Also, lone workers are a group of workers who are especially vulnerable in certain instances. For example, they may be at more risk of violence, particularly if they are exposed to members of the public, and also they may be at more risk if they are injured or fall ill. And these situations of lone working may be inappropriate or additional precautions may be necessary to protect the individual. Going to last step of the risk assessment process, which is the risk assessment review. Do you remember in chapter 2 about the policy, when we spoke about reasons or when we have to review the policy? Actually, it's the same for the risk assessment. If the risk assessment is no longer valid after a major or repeated accident, also after a major change in the organization, if a new technology is used or new process or new equipment, also as a result of a monitoring or reviewing performance, such as an audit, also periodically after a reasonable period of time. Here we are in the end of this lecture. Thanks for watching and see you in the next lecture. Hello and welcome, dear friends, in new lecture of our course Health and Safety Management System. Almost done with chapter 4, Health and Safety Management Element 3, Planning and Implementation. Last lecture we finished the steps of the risk assessment process, and this lecture we jumped to steps following the risk assessment and hierarchy of controls. We agreed that all workplaces have hazards and all hazards create risk, and the good safety management is the logical process of identifying the significant hazards, evaluating the risk created by each, and then either eliminating the risk entirely or reducing it to an acceptable level by introducing control measures. And sometimes one control measure is effective in reducing the risk to an acceptable standard, and in other instances, a combination of different types is needed. So the hierarchy of control is a concept used a great deal in health and safety, and it's a list of options in order of importance, effectiveness, or priority, written so that the most extreme and effective methods of the control is at top of the hierarchy, with the least effective at the bottom. The following elements make up the general hierarchy of the controls. Starting with elimination. If a hazard can be eliminated, then the risk created by that hazard disappears. This might be done by completely avoiding the activity. For example, an assembly workshop could stop welding steel in order to avoid the risk inherent in welding operations and could buy in prefabricated metal components. The obvious limitation of this approach is that it's not possible to apply it to most of activities carried out in the workplace, and in this case it may be possible to eliminate one or more hazards inherent in the activity. For example, lifting equipment such as hoists and lifts can be used to completely eliminate the manual handling. Lower step in the hierarchy is the substitution. Sometimes hazard elimination cannot be achieved, but it's possible to substitute one hazard with another that creates less risk. For example, one hazardous substance classified as toxic is substituted with one that is irritant. The replacement substance is still hazardous, but far less hazardous. Also, a handling aid such as a trolley doesn't eliminate manual handling, but it does reduce the risk of injury associated with moving boxes around the workplace. Next one is the engineering controls. Engineering controls involve the use of an engineering solutions to prevent exposure to the hazard. It might be done by isolation or total enclosure. The aim here is to isolate the hazard physically so that nobody is exposed to it. This might be done by total enclosure or containment of the hazard. For example, total enclosure of a process that generates dust to prevent its escape. Also, separation or segregation, simply placing the hazard in an inaccessible location. For example, the overhead wires where an electrical conductor has been placed out of reach. In this case, precautions have to be taken to ensure that a safe distance from the overhead wires is maintained at all times. Also, it can be done by a partial enclosure. For example, a hazardous substance might be handled in a fume hoods or partial enclosure, which the worker can reach into for handling purposes. In this picture, you can see that air is extracted from the top or back of this partial enclosure so that airborne contaminants are extracted from the enclosure away from the worker. Also, by safety devices, ensure that the item is used in the correct way and not an unsafe way. For example, the interlock switches are fitted to movable guards or machinery to ensure that when the guard is open, the machine will not operate, but when the guard is closed, it will. Well, that was the last point in this lecture. Thanks for watching and see you in next lecture. Hello and welcome, dear friends, in new lecture of our course Health and Safety Management System. Finally, with last lecture of chapter 4, Health and Safety Management Element 3, Planning and Implementation. Last lecture we started pointing to hierarchy of controls, elimination, substitution, and engineering. And this lecture we continue with the administrative controls. Administrative controls are those that rely on procedures and behavior, such as safe system of work. Simply, it's a step-by-step procedure for carrying out a significant task safely, bearing in mind hazards, risk, control measures, and equipment and environment, and the emergencies related to this task. Safe systems of work are necessary whenever hazards cannot be physically eliminated and some elements of risk remains. Also, it's essential to prevent accidents or other incidents. Administrative controls can also be a clear rules and strict system, also clear information and instructions and training, and also supervision, or by reduce the exposure. Many health hazards in the workplace cause a degree of harm that is entirely dependent on the dose that the worker receives. For example, the concentration of a chemical substance, and the greater the dose, the more harm done. Other solution is also reduce the time of exposure. For example, an engineer who spends all day working on a machinery with hazardous moving parts is more likely to suffer injury than an engineer who only spends 1 hour of their working day exposed to the same hazard. Very important control can be set in the workplace is the permit to work system. Permit to work is a documented control system requiring written confirmation that certain actions have been carried out to eliminate or control risks before a high risk or non-routine activity is carried out. In other words, it can be defined as a formal or documented safety procedure forming part a safe system of work, which ensure that all necessary actions are taken before or during and after particularly high-risk work. For example, working at heights or excavation works or hot works such as welding or working on live electrical system also confined space entry. Confined space is a place that is not designed for people to live in, and it's any space of an enclosed nature where there are specified risks arising because of the nature of the space. And these risks can be fire or explosions, loss of consciousness, or asphyxiation from gas or fumes, also drowning and oxygen deficiency or enrichment. And when developing the safe system of work for confined space entry, the competent person will have to decide on the appropriate level of supervision, competency requirement of worker doing the job, also communication methods and the environment conditions testing, and removal of residual and ventilation that may be required, and the PPE requirement, also emergencies arrangement and isolation and lock-off in feeds and outfeed of the pipes, and isolation of electrical and mechanical hazards. Last option in the controls is the personal protective equipment, or the PPE. There are some times where none of the above control measures can be used, and there are times when some of them can, but residual risk still remains, and if this is the case, then it may be necessary to use the PPE. However, PPE is still the least effective option in all control measures, and there are many different types of the PPE available. For example, there are a PPE for the head protection and eye protection, or foot protection, or ear protection, or respiratory protection, and the body protection, and the hand or arm or skin protection. And all these kind of PPE, we have agreed in last elements that is the duty of care of the employer to provide the worker with the suitable PPE. And also there is a duty of him to ensure that it is suitable for the type of the risk, and ensure the compatibility of the PPE, and provide suitable storage for the PPE to enable the worker to keep it clean and in good condition. And it must be free of any charge, and the employer must provide information and training how to use the PPE. And also he should supervise and enforce the using of PPE, and he should make a frequently inspection for the PPE in order to repair or replace damaged PPE. Here we are in the end of Chapter 4, Health and Safety Management Element 3, Planning and Implementation. We hope that all learning points have been successfully achieved clearly. Thanks for watching, and see you in the first lecture of Chapter 5. Hello and welcome, dear friends, in new lecture of our course, Health and Safety Management System. Congratulations, reaching the final chapter, Health and Safety Management Element 4, Monitoring, Auditing and Review. Last chapter, we discussed safety culture and safety-related behaviors and factors affecting it, also the risk assessment process. And today, we are with the fourth element in the safety management system, monitoring, auditing and review. So look back again in the last elements and remind yourself about the PDGA system. This element correlates directly with the last two parts in the cycle, check and act. Health and safety performance should be monitored. This can be done using various methods that fall into two categories. Active monitoring, that ensure that health and safety standards are correct in the workplace before accident or incident or ill health are caused. And reactive monitoring, that using accident, incident, and ill health as indicators of performance to highlight the areas of concern. And in most workplaces, both types of monitoring are useful. So let's look at each category in more detail. First category, active monitoring. Active monitoring is concerned with checking standards before an unwanted event occurs. The intention is to identify either conformance or non-conformance with standards. And there are many different ways of actively monitoring health and safety performance. First way is the systematic inspections. One popular way to actively monitor health and safety performance is to carry out a systematic inspections. These inspections can focus on the 4 Ps, planned, such as machinery and vehicles, as well as in-statutory inspections and examinations. Also premises, which is the workplace and the working environment, and people, the working methods and behavior of them. Also procedures, like safe system of work, method statements, and permits to work. An inspection might concentrate on one, several, or all 4 of these areas, and systematic inspection regimes usually exist in many different forms within the workplace. For example, a daily inspection regime where forklift truck drivers inspect their own vehicles at the start of each shift. Seem to be it relates to the plant inspection. Also other example, a weekly inspection regime where supervisors check all forklift trucks are being driven safely. It relates to the people inspection. And a monthly inspection regime where the manager checks the entire warehouse for housekeeping. That relates to premises inspection. Also, a 6-monthly through examination of forklift truck by a competent engineer to ensure safety of the load-bearing parts. It's also a plant inspection and an annual inspection regime for the storage racking to ensure structure integrity. It's also a premises inspection. Second way to carry out an active monitoring is the safety inspections. The term safety inspections mean a regular, scheduled activity with comparison to accepted performance standards, and this can be applied to the routine inspection of a workplace to determine if a general standards of health and safety are acceptable or if corrective actions is necessary, and a statutory inspection of an item by a competent person to fulfill a legal requirement. For example, the annual examination of an item of lifting equipment. Also, a periodic inspection of a plant or machinery as a part of a planned maintenance program. Also, a pre-use checks, which is carried out by workers before they use it. And get to know that all these inspections can be repeated routinely to form an inspection regime, and can all be recorded to provide evidence of inspection. Third way is the safety sampling. This is the technique of monitoring compliance with a particular workplace standard by working at a representative sample only. That if a big enough sample is collected, then there is a strong likelihood that the results of the sample will reflect the result for the workplace as a whole. For example, if the standard in a large office is that all 1,200 fire extinguishers must be inspected annually by a competent engineer, then there are several ways to monitor this standard. Either you have to check the maintenance record to ensure each and every fire extinguisher has been signed off, or check all 1,200 fire extinguishers directly by inspecting every one, or you may check a representative sample. For example, say 50 extinguishers selected at a random from various locations around the complex. The last method is safety sampling. It provides better evidence of compliance to the standard than simply checking the engineer's maintenance records, since they may have signed extinguishers off without inspecting them. It's also far less time consuming than checking 1,200 extinguishers directly. Well, that's all for today. Thanks for watching and see you in next lecture. Hello and welcome dear friends, a new lecture of our course Health and Safety Management System. Finally, with the last lecture in Chapter 5, Health and Safety Management Element 4, Monitoring, Auditing and Review, and also the final lecture of our course. Last lecture we started active monitoring category and how to carry it out through different ways. Today we continue with way number 4 to carry it out, which is the safety survey. A safety survey is a detailed examination of one particular issue or a topic. For example, a detailed examination of a provision of the emergency lighting within a building. Actually, the word survey can be used to refer to various types of detailed examination, like environmental survey or structure survey or staff survey, and all of these types of survey might be used to actively monitor safety. Last way we have is the safety tours. As a safety tour is a high-profile inspection of workplace carried out by a group of a team, including managers, and this tour may be formal or informal by a walk around looking at points of interest. And the group carrying out the tour should include managers from the area being inspected and possibly workers' representative and safety specialists and engineers and workers from the area. One of the objectives of this tour is to raise the profile of health and safety and to demonstrate management interest and commitment. The second category to monitor health and safety performance is the reactive monitoring. Reactive monitoring uses incidents, ill health, and other unwanted events and situations as indicator of health and safety performance to highlight areas of concern. And it can be done also by different ways, such as statistics analysis, that data can be collected and reported about a number of different unwanted events, like accident, near misses, or cases of ill health. And this data can be analyzed to see if there are any trends that increases or decreases in number of certain types of event over a period of time, or there is any patterns that collections or hotspot of a certain types of events. Other way to carry out a reactive monitoring is the enforcement action, that the number of enforcement actions taken against an organization is an indication of health and safety performance. Other way is the incidents investigations. We need to look in more detail in this point. Unfortunately, in spite of an organization's best efforts, accidents do happen, and when they happen, it's important that incidents is reported, recorded, and investigated in appropriate and timely manner. Please remember that the accident definition is it's an unwanted and unplanned event which result in loss or harm of any kind, such as injury to person or damage to equipment. And there are many reasons for conducting investigations, but one of the most important is that it happened once and it may happen again. And when it happens again, the outcome may be as bad as or worse than it was at the first time. And it's therefore important to understand exactly the root cause and the reason why the accident occurred, so that the corrective action can be taken and prevent it to happen again. Also, it shows the management commitment to health and safety issue in the workplace. And it's to comply with the law that it's a legal requirement to report and record the investigations of any accident or incident in the workplace. And data and the information collected can be useful in case of criminal cases. Last point in this chapter is health and safety audit. Audit is defined as it's a systematic critical examination of the whole health and safety management system to identify any weakness, then produce action plan with a suitable recommendation to correct any of non-conformity. And auditing is a mechanism for verifying that organization's safety management system is in place and operating effectively. And it will check that a appropriate management arrangements are in place and adequate risk control system exists, that they are implemented and are consistent with the hazard profile of the organization, and appropriate workplace precautions are in place. And the intention of an audit is to provide critical feedback of a management system so that appropriate follow-up action can be taken. Please don't get confused between the audit and the inspection process. Audit focus on the management system that it checks for documents like policy or procedures or the organizing in the workplace. Also, it checks for the records for training and the maintenance. And it verifies that the standard that exists with the workplace by interview and a direct observation. But the inspection process, it checks for the workplace uncontrolled hazards and addressing any that are found. Then, here we are in the end of our health and safety management system course. We hope that all 5 chapters are covered clearly and understood. And now you are able to establish or handle the safety management system effectively in your organization. I'm pleasured being with you. Thanks for watching and see you in next course. Hello and welcome my friends, in the first lecture in this course, Controlling Workplace Hazards. Today we start with part 1 as we discussed previously, and the first chapter is the Workplace Hazard and Risk Control. Section number 1 in this chapter is the Workplace Environment. And here we outline good practice with regard to basic welfare requirements that apply to the workplace. And please get to know that this topic has been already covered in the Unit 1 IGC 1, and all these requirements are considered to be a part of the employer's welfare provision. So let's get a quick revision about the minimum welfare standards, starting with drinking water, which is simply the access to a clean drinking water for the employees. Secondly, the toilet facilities and access to a sufficient number of toilets for the number of workers present with separate facilities for men and women. And they should be protected from the weather and adequately clean. Also, a special provision should be made for the disabled people. Third minimum welfare standard is the washing facilities and the access to suitable washing facilities by toilets, changing facilities. Also, showers may be necessary if the work is dirty or involve a potential contamination of a hazard substance. And it should have both hot and cold running water with soap and towels or any other means of drying. Next standard is the changing room, which must be suitable changing facilities if workers have to change into special workwear, and this involves significant undressing. And this should be also clean and ventilated with separate facilities for men and women. Then accommodation for clothing, such as lockers or other storage facilities, where workers have to change for work so that their personal clothing can be kept clean and secure. And the separate storage for the dirty working clothing may be necessary also to prevent cross-contamination. Last point is the resting and eating facilities, and its access to a suitable rest areas where workers can take a break from work. Such areas should have sufficient seating and be away from hazard of work area. It allows workers to remove the PPE and relax. Actually, eating facilities also should be provided so that food can be eaten in a hygienic environment. And if hot food is not provided at work, then basic facilities might be provided so workers can make their own hot drinks and food. Also, non-smoking facilities should be available to protect workers from second-hand smoke. There are such factors we need to consider when we provide a workplace lighting. So the minimum light levels should be achieved, and this can be indicated by local codes of practice or guidance. Also, natural light should be used as much as possible, and light levels should be adjusted to fit the level of detail required in the work. And local lighting, such as spotlights positioned above the machinery, might be required to give higher level of light on critical areas. It also must be arranged to avoid reflections and glare that might temporarily disable workers, and it must be arranged to avoid the creation of shadows that might create a risk. Also, lighting must be suitable for the environment, and the emergency lighting should be provided to ensure safety in the event of main supply failure. Next point in this section is the exposure to extremes of temperature. Extreme temperature environment can be found in some workplaces. For example, workers in foundry or bakery will be exposed to a very hot and dry environment. Also, workers in cold storage warehouse will be exposed to a very cold environment. And those who work outdoors may be exposed to both extremes, depending on climate and the season. So starting with health and safety effects of working in a hot environment, first thing is the dehydration, when water is lost as a result of sweating. Also, muscle cramps as a result of a salt loss through sweating. And the heat stress, where core temperature of the body cannot be controlled and start to increase, causing discomfort and lethargy and headaches and fainting. And heat exhaustion and the heat stroke, where core temperature of the body increases rapidly, causing hallucination, coma, and maybe death. There are also other effects associated with the source of the heat, such as skin burns or cancer from the exposure to sunlight or burn from radiant heat and the contact with the hot surfaces. Well, that's fine for today. Thanks for watching and see you in the next lecture. Welcome back my friends, in new lecture of this course, Controlling Workplace Hazards. Last lecture we stopped with health and safety effects of hot environment, and today we continue with effects of the cold environment. We mentioned that places such as cold storage warehouse, workers will be exposed to a very cold environment. So the health and safety effect of the working in cold environment can be hypothermia, when the core temperature of the body drops below 35 degrees, causing shivering, mood swings, irrational behavior, lethargy, drowsiness. and maybe death. Next effect can be frostbite, when the body tissues are frozen, causing tissue damage, and in extreme cases, necrosis, gangrene, and maybe amputation. Slip hazards also are considered. In particular, floors will become slippery with ice. Also freeze-burn injuries from skin contact with a very cold surface. Finally, apart from these specific effects for hot and cold environment, which both can create an increased risk of fatigue because of the stress on the body, and this makes workers more exposed to the accidents. So after we learned the effects of the hot and cold environment, we have to know the preventive measures to control the risks. And the first action is to eliminate the need of workers to enter the extreme temperature environment, such as by automation the process. And if this cannot be done, the environment can be regulated to reduce the temperature extremes. For example, heating a cold workplace to more reasonable temperature. And if these options are not possible, then other controls might be providing good workplace ventilation, and the moving air has the cooling effect. Also insulate heat sources by lagging the hot pipes, for example. Also shielding the heat sources to control the radiant heat and prevent contact burns, and provide cool refuges where workers can escape the heat, and provide easy access to drinking water, and providing frequent breaks and job rotation for the workers, and provide appropriate clothing for use in the hot work environment. On the other side, for the cold environment, there are other controls such as prevent or protect workers from cold drafts, shield and lag extreme cold surfaces, and provide warm refuges where workers can warm up, and provide appropriate PPE. Also, you have to provide breaks and job rotation, and provide easy access to hot drinks. Last thing you have to consider that in both types of environment, information, instructions, training, and supervision should be provided so that workers understand the health consequences of the environment and the early warning signs of problems. For more information you need to know, please go to the link attached with this lecture. Last point we have is the cold environment PPE, which can be insulated jackets, trousers, boots, gloves, balaclavas, and cold weather safety coverall. Here's the end of our lecture. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next lecture. Welcome back, my friends, in new lecture of this course, Controlling Workplace Hazards. Today we start with a major point, which is prevention of falling materials and safe stacking and storage. We agreed before that workplaces can easily become untidy, and if housekeeping is not managed in the workplace, spoil heaps at excavations, piles of new materials, waste can all accumulate very quickly, and this can prevent the safe movement of pedestrians and vehicles around the workplace. Also, it can block lights, and also can block access to essential services such as fire equipment. And in some instances, stacks and piles of materials can present an immediate danger of collapse. Also, stacked materials in particular can topple over if they are not stacked correctly. So good housekeeping starts with good design and layout of the workplace, and sufficient space must be allocated for the storage of the material. So in particular, at the planning stage, storage areas should be clearly defined, and the certain materials and substances should be segregated during the storage process. And a secure storage may be required, such as a gas bottle cages. And these areas should be kept clean and tidy and should be routinely inspected. And don't forget the appropriate warning signs, and it should be displayed where necessary. For stacking materials, each stack should be for one material only, and a maximum stack height must be set, depending on the strength and the stability of the material being stacked. And also stacks should be vertical, not leaning, and pallets should be used to keep materials off the ground, and the sufficient space must be allowed between stacks for safe movement, and it must be protected from being struck by vehicles. Next point we have is considered a very critical point, which is the storage of the flammable materials. Storing flammable materials and flammable liquids and the flammable gases should be done safely. So flammable liquids, solids, gases should be kept in separate stores, and oxygen cylinders should be stored separately from other flammable gases. Also, external and open air stores should be away from the building, or drains or excavations. And if this is not possible, there should be a fire-resistant partition separating the store from the building, or drains and excavation must be sealed, and there should be a security fence around the stores. Also, internal stores should be constructed of fire-resistant material and provide a good level of ventilation to stop dangerous levels of gas accumulating. And stores containing a large quantities of flammable should have at least 2 exits. Doors and gates should be locked when they are not in use, and it should have a suitable warning or safety signs. Also, hot works should not be carried out close to the storage areas, and firefighting equipment should be provided, and stores should be inspected regularly for correct use and housekeeping. Here is our end of this section. Please don't forget to check the attached file of the revision questions. It's very important for you to make sure that you understand this section correctly. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next lecture. Welcome back, my friends, in new lecture in this course, Controlling Workplace Hazards. Today we start with new section in this element talking about violence at work. Work-related violence is defined as any incident in which a person abused, threatened, or assaulted in circumstances related to their work. Actually, there is a growing awareness of this issue in many countries, and an understanding that abuse, threats, and assault are not inevitable occupational risks that should simply be accepted and ignored. And get to know there are certain occupations and type of work are associated with an increased risk of violence, and in some cases, they may also be the risk of violence between employees in the same workplace. For example, the cash handling work that involves handling quantities of cash or valuables that puts workers at risk of violence associated with robbery. Also lone work, that takes the worker to into urban areas or put them in a contact with members of the public at remote or private locations. Third situation is any work that representing authority, like police work and traffic wardens. Also dealing with people under stress. And when people are under stress, they are less capable of handling their emotions and can lose control. And when they are under the influence of drugs and alcohol. Also censuring or saying no workers who have to give warning, penalties, or fines, and who have to refuse a service. Examples of occupation at risk of violence involve one or more of these risk factors include hospital accident and emergency staff, also police work and social workers, bus and taxi drivers, and firefighters sometimes, also traffic wardens, and don't forget the customer service work. And when you have any problem with your internet connection, for example, or your mobile phone, you call the company, and in such cases you get angry at the worker you are talking to. Next point, we have to know that what are the available control measures for violence. And the first step you have to know that in managing the risk of work-related violence is to find out the exact nature of problem. And this can be done by collecting and analyzing incident reports, or interviewing the staff, or a staff survey. Then it will be possible to identify and implement the correct preventive measure, which will be different depending on the nature of the workplace. And in general, there are two strategies that can be adopted. First one is preventing violence at central office. And this can be done by setting a zero tolerance policy against the offenders. Also using a security staff and CCTV cameras, and making a security doors between public areas and staff areas. And as much as possible, we have to minimize queues and waiting times, and make a clear announcement about waiting times. Also, the company must keen on providing training for the staff and provide adequate instructions about handling the problems of the customers. The second strategy we have is preventing violence to workers conducting home visits. And this can be done by minimizing lone working as much as possible, and keep records of past incident and vetting customers, make a visit logging with the supervisors, and keen on keeping a means of communication, and must make a pre and post visit telephone calls, and also provide training for the staff. Avoid any visit after dark, and must park in a secure area, and not carrying any cash or valuables as much as possible. For more details about work-related violence, please visit the links attached in this lecture. You will find also some attached revision questions that you have to answer to make sure that you understand this section successfully. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next lecture. Welcome back, my friends, in new lecture in this course, Controlling Workplace Hazards. Next section we have today is about substance misuse at work. There are several types of substances that may be misused at work. For example, alcohol. Sometimes alcoholic drinks are taken at work or during lunchtime, and the employees are returning to work can then be under the influence of alcohol. Often the effect of alcohol consumed the night before can remain into the next day with damaging effects, especially for vehicle drivers or machinery operators. Next type is legal or illegal drugs. Legal drugs can be in form of the non-prescription drugs, such as painkiller or strong medicine treatment prescribed by the doctor, while illegal drugs, such as heroin and cocaine, may be taken by person while in the workplace or away from it. In all cases, use of such drugs can have a damaging effect on the person, not only leading to higher risk when driving vehicles or operating machinery, but also affecting their personality and response and attitude, and other persons may be put at risk as well. Third type is solvents. Inhalation of solvents, which may be through uncontrolled or badly controlled use of hazardous substance, such as solvent cleaning or paint spraying, can affect a person's performance and can damage their health. We agreed that alcohol is an addictive drug that significantly impairs the sense and reaction time, even at low doses. And the exact symptoms of alcohol and drug abuse will vary, but some general symptoms might be observed, such as person's late attendance, and the absenteeism rate is increased. Also, the reduction in the quality of work, and the reduction of work rate, and his dishonesty, and theft, and the deterioration in work relationship with his colleagues. And all these will be associated with a cost to an employer, as well as increased risk. The conclusion is drugs and alcohol cause sensory impairment, and in many instances fatigue and drowsiness. And there are obvious safety risks associated with drugs and alcohol, like driving a vehicle or operating machinery under the influence increase the risk to the worker and also to others. And there are also health risks to workers, usually associated with long-term abuse. But what are the risk control measures that we can use to face this problem? Actually, the employer should collect information about the state of the problem in the workplace. Also, the company history may show a clear pattern of drugs and alcohol misuse. So the employer should establish a clear drugs and alcohol policy, and this policy may contain rules restricting access to alcohol in the workplace or during the working hours, and the legal requirements prohibiting workers from being under the influence of drugs and alcohol, and other rules set by the employer prohibiting workers from being under the influence of the drugs and alcohol, and arrangement for any random drug and alcohol testing that workers will be subject to, and arrangements for workers to have access to rehabilitation and treatment programs if they admit to having a problem, and the consideration of disciplinary procedures in the workplace for workers who refuse assistance and refuse to be tested. Also, provision of a clear information and instructions and training to workers, supervisors, and the managers. And drug and alcohol awareness campaigns should be considered, and any drug and alcohol testing policy must be justified and clearly explained to workers. And there are legal and ethical issues associated with testing regimes that must be carefully considered. Here's the end of this lecture. Please find the attached file of the revision question to make sure that you understand it successfully. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next lecture. Hello my friends and welcome back in new lecture in this course, Controlling Workplace Hazards. Today we go to the next section, Safe Movement of People in the Workplace. When people move around in the workplace, they are exposed to a range of hazards, and these hazards can be categorized by the type of the accident they can cause. Starting with typical slip hazards, which can be smooth floor surface that are inherently slippery, like the polished marble, or wet because of any spills or cleaning operations. Also contamination of a floor with a slippery contamination, like oils. Also the frost and ice, like outside pavement in the winter, or the floor in the deep freezer. Also, a person's footwear can make a big difference to how vulnerable they are to slipping on the floor. Next point is the typical trip hazards, which can be by uneven or loose floor surfaces, like broken pavement or steps. Also trailing cables, like the cord of the vacuum cleaner, and objects on the floor, like a back lift on the floor. Please note that people frequently trip over their own feet, and when people slip or trip, they often fall to the floor. And although falls on the same level don't always lead to a serious injury, they may lead to a broken bones, especially in the hand or the wrist or the arm. Also, steps and stair are places of a particular concern. They are locations where slip, trip, and fall accidents can occur more frequently, and the consequences of such accident can be more serious. And there are some personal factors we need to consider, such as the old age. The person above 60 years old may have a chronic disease or sensory impairment like uncorrected poor eyesight, and poor physical condition or the ill health. Also poor environmental conditions such as insufficient lighting or limited vision because of the dust or the fog. Next point is the typical hazards for falls from height. So typical hazards can be like working next to an unprotected edge, like a flat roof. Also working on a fragile material, like a fragile roof. And using an access equipment, like a mobile elevated working platform, or using a ladder or a step ladder. Also standing on an object to reach high level, like using a chair to reach the top of the shelf. Get to know that falls from height often cause a very serious injury and are a common cause of a fatal injury. Next point is collisions with moving vehicles. And typical hazards can be pedestrians walkway that requires pedestrians to walk in a vehicle's traffic route, or a pedestrians crossing points and exit that open onto a vehicle traffic route. Also areas where people have to walk near to moving vehicles, like roadworks or loading bays. Next point is the typical moving object hazards, which can be automated machinery, such as spot welding robots, or unsecured object, such as a container on the deck of a moving ship. Next point is the typical flying object hazards, like ejected parts, such as sharp metal waste ejected during the metal drilling, also thrown objects such as scaffold coupling. Next point is typical falling object hazards, like loads falling from height, such as boxes falling from a pallet when being lifted by a forklift, or object being dislodged during work at height, like slates dislodged from a roof during roof work, or objects falling from a height because of adverse weather, or toppling of unstable objects. Last point we have in this section is the maintenance activities. And get to know that all of the above incidents can occur while person is involved in the maintenance activities, because maintenance engineers often work in a location and situation as a result of a fault or a problem. And in this area, the hazard discussed earlier may exist, and there may be spillage or damage to floors or confined spaces or low ceiling or poor lighting or vehicles movement in the work area. Here is the end of this lecture. I hope everything are clear. Thanks for watching and see you in the next lecture. So then we can provide adequate drainage system and install a good housekeeping policy in the workplace. Next point is the designated walkways. Walkways can be used to ensure that pedestrians stay within the designated areas. Also vehicles or other hazards don't stray into pedestrians areas. And these walkways can be used to provide a safe route through a car park or a warehouse or a loading bay area. So it can be designated by guardrails to provide a direct physical protection, or curbs and pavement, or either marking on the floor. Next point is fencing and guarding, and they can be used in a variety of situations to control hazard to pedestrians, such as the guardrails, which give protection to pedestrians' walkways. Also perimeter fencing to prevent unauthorized access to the construction sites, or both guarding and perimeter fencing to prevent access to dangerous area. And the last point is the temporary fencing, which is the most common type, and it's aimed to prevent access to a hazard area. Next control measure is the use of signs and PPE. Actually, clearly visible and easily understood signs and marking should be provided so that the pedestrians, even those who are unfamiliar with the workplace, to get the awareness of the hazards and they must do avoid them. And as detailed in the Unit 1 of this course, signs should conform a relevant standards, like the prohibition sign or warning sign or a mandatory sign, and also safe condition sign. Get to know that hazard warning markings, like the yellow diagonal strips on a black background, should be fixed onto pedestrians' hazards, like the edge of steps or an overhead obstruction, while the hazard marking might be also used on floors to indicate areas to avoid. For the using of the PPE, it may be necessary to protect pedestrians from various hazards, and some types of PPE will protect them from a specific hazard in the area, like the ear defenders in a high noise area. Also high visibility clothing, which by a pedestrian can be identified from a greater distance, like a case of a car driver who can see a highway worker in the road, and through high visibility clothing he will be able to see him sooner, and he will be able to identify the worker as a person more quickly, and therefore he will be able to take earlier action. Please bear in mind that safe movement of people in the workplace requires that those people are giving information, instructions, and training, so that they must understand what is required of them to apply. And in some instances, they can be done with a use of appropriate signs, and in others, it requires the provision of a specific training to communicate a safety rules. And please remember, like we discussed in the Unit 1 of this course, the employee induction training should incorporate information about the safe movement around the workplace, and these should also be provided to contractors and visitors. And since people don't always follow the instructions and the training, so there should be an adequate level of supervision. And this usually means simply enforcing the safety rules in the workplace. Last point is the maintenance of the safe workplace. Once the measures have been taken to ensure that pedestrians can move around the workplace safely, some thoughts must be given to the maintenance of that safe workplace. And these issues might be cleaning and housekeeping for the floors and walkways, and access and egress routes, which must be inspected routinely and cleaned, and in some cases repaired if required. Also the environmental conditions, such as lighting and noise level in the workplace. Here's the end of this lecture. Please find the attached file of some revision questions. It may help you to understand this section successfully. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next lecture. Hello and welcome back, my friends, in new lecture in this course, Controlling Workplace Hazards. We are still with Element 1, Workplace Hazard and Risk Control. Next section we start today is the working at height, and it's the most important section in this element as it contains very large amount of information, so I hope you concentrate very well. Work at height is the type of work where there is a risk of fall causing any type of personal injury. And this doesn't mention the ground level, so it's possible to work at height while underground or at a ground level, like working in tunnels or working at the site of a sheer drop. And get to know that working at height results in more fatalities than any other construction activity. And in such cases, construction and maintenance work often require people to work at height. Such cases like steel workers erecting the steel framework of a building, also scaffolders erecting or striking a scaffold, also demolition workers and welders working at the site of a deep excavation, and pipe fitters fixing a pipe work on a ceiling of a factory, and painters working on an external walls of a building. So people involved in these works will be very used to work at height, and this can lead to complacency. So before starting that work, we must know the main risk associated with the work at height. First risk is the worker falling from height, and it can result in his death. That working at height causes a higher proportion of fatalities than all other types of construction work. Also neck or spinal injuries, leading to permanent paralysis and the multi-broken bones. Next risk associated with the work at height is an object falling onto people below. That falling objects can also cause a severe injuries that may result in death or brain damage or even paralysis or multi-broken bones. So after we know the main risks associated with the work at height, so we have to ask, what are the basic hazards of the work at height? And the answer might include a lot of types of hazards, such as the vertical distance factor. And this factor is very critical in the potential risk of the injury from work at height. And the truth is, most of people expect that a further distance a person falls from, the greater injury will be. However, a large number of fatalities actually occur as a result of fall from a height of just 2 meters or less, so it's not the only important consideration in the risk. Next point is the roofs hazard. Roofs work includes construction and maintenance of roofs, such as replacing tiles and cleaning and repairs. And actually many accidents occur during small jobs and maintenance work. And there are two types of roofs, starting with fragile roofs. Fragile roofs, it's any roofing structure that it's not specifically designed to carry loads of workers, but it's only has the sufficient strength to withstand the force produced by the weather. So roofing materials such as cement, asbestos, glass or reinforced plastics, they are all liable to collapse under the weight of the worker. So all fragile roofs should be clearly signed, and the safe working methods for fragile roofs is usually by the use of the roof ladder or crawling boards. Second type we have is the sloping roofs. These roofs with an incline greater than 10 degrees and falls from the edge of sloping roofs generally also cause a serious injury. Next hazard is the deterioration of materials. The condition of the structure on which people are working should be very good and secure. However, materials deteriorate over the time when exposed to the weather condition. And get to know that bad materials represent a hazard in two ways. That the material can break when a person put his weight on it, causing the fall through the surface, or the material can break off and fall to hit the people below. And you may find no evidence that the deterioration has occurred until it's too late, so take care to ensure that the materials are very good and secure. Next hazard is the unprotected edges. Where the edges of surfaces on which people are working are open, there are a great risk of falling. And later on in this element we will know how to control this type of hazard. Here is the end of this lecture. Thanks for watching and see you in the next lecture. Hello and welcome back, my friends, in new lecture in this course, Controlling Workplace Hazard. We're still with the point of basic hazards of work at height. Next hazard is the unstable or poorly maintained access equipment. The access equipment includes scaffolding, towers, platform, and ladders. And there is a risk in using such equipment, but this risk is increased if this equipment is not properly stable or secured in some way. And any access equipment, if it's not correctly sited or poorly built or poorly secured, that can cause a collapse or a toppling for the equipment. So the access equipment must be maintained correctly to ensure the stability, and this must be carried out by a competent person. And we will see later for details on the way in which the access equipment can become unstable and how to control it. The hazard of the weather is also critical. The weather can increase the risk associated with working at height, such as raining or freezing condition can increase the risk of slipping. Also high wind can make access equipment unstable. Also the cold condition, which can cause a loss of the manual skill and can lead to an increased risk of the muscle injuries. Next point is the falling material hazard. Objects falling from height are able to cause a considerable damage to both people or other materials that they may hit. And these objects themselves may be a structural material or waste material or dropped equipment or tools. And there are some conditions that contribute the likelihood of falling materials, such as the deterioration of the structure, causing crumbling of the brickworks, and the poor storage of the material, like at the edge of the scaffold platform or in unstable stacks, or poor housekeeping of the workplace, leading to accumulation of the waste and loose materials. Also gaps in platform surface or between access platform or walls. Also the unprotected edges and incorrect methods of getting materials, whether upward or downward, like tying a hammer by a rope and pull it up or downward. At this point, we have discussed all points related to the work at height hazards. I wish everything are clear. Thanks for watching and see you in the next lecture. Hello and welcome back, my friends, in new lecture in this course, Controlling Workplace Hazards. Last lecture we stopped with all basic hazards related to the work at height, and today we continue with control measures to the work at height. We will follow the risk prevention hierarchy as discussed in the Unit 1 in the first course. So the first thing we start is avoid work at height. And where work at height cannot be avoided, you can use work equipment or other measures to prevent falls. And if the risk of fall cannot be eliminated, we have to use equipment or other measures to minimize the distance and the consequences of the fall. So let's start with the first point. We have to know that the best way of managing the risk inherent in the work at height is to eliminate the need to work at height entirely. And this can be avoided by modifying a work process. For example, cleaning windows from the ground by a pole rather than from ladders. Also modifying the design, such as erecting guardrail or steelwork at the ground level and then using a crane to put the steel and the guardrails into the place. But you have to know that in most cases, avoidance will not be possible and the control measure for work at height will be required. So here we will need to initiate the risk assessment process. And the exact nature of the control measure should be decided during the risk assessment, and this will depend on various factors. Such factors can be the nature and the duration of the task to be carried out. It also can be the level of competence of the person to be involved, and the training that may need to be provided, also planning and the level of supervision required, and means of access and egress, and also the suitability and the condition of the equipment to be used and its maintenance, and the use of working platform, guardrails, and two ports. Also the personal protective equipment such as harness and helmets, and whether a fall arrest system is required or not. During the process, we will also need to consider the weather conditions and the health condition of the individuals who is carrying out the task, and we will need to be in compliance with the relevant regulation. And before starting the job, we have to issue a permit to work authorized by the responsible persons. After all this, we will need adequate supervision to ensure that all control measures are implemented in the place. Next step in our strategy is preventing falls and falling materials. And actually proper planning and supervision, which is so important to prevent falls from height and falling materials. And those responsible people for such work should be experienced and should have the knowledge to ensure proper selection and the use of the correct access equipment and the correct provision and handling of tools and the materials, especially getting them up and down from work locations. And ensuring adequate information, instruction and training for all persons who will be involved. Also, you should consider the regular inspections of workplace and work equipment and the work methods, which are essential to reduce the risk, and get to know that the unsafe act shouldn't be tolerated, but it should be stopped, and ensuring that all employees know why the work is being stopped, as well as the consequences if further unsafe work is carried out. On the other hand, prevention of injury caused by falling materials should be controlled using similar approach, like prevent materials from falling using physical safeguards, such as two ports and brick guards. And if the risk remains, use physical safeguards to prevent falling objects from hitting people below. And here in the picture you can see an example. You can see the debris chute for the safe disposal of waste material to prevent falling material from hitting people below. Next point we have is guardrails and two ports. We agree that wherever possible, protection should be provided at all unprotected edges to prevent people and materials from falling. And this simply can be achieved by means of guardrails, two ports and brick guards on scaffolding and other platform. So in general, guardrails are designed to prevent people from falling. And there are some key features of any guardrail, such as it should be securely fixed in position so it will withstand any expected impact, and it should be high enough to prevent a person from toppling over the top, and it should not have any large gap in it through which a person could fall, and it should be strong enough so that it will not bend or distort, and it should fully enclose all unprotected edges. On the other hand, two boards are designed to prevent small objects such as rappel tools from being casually kicked off the platform, and they are usually planks laid on their edge at the right angle to the working platform. Last point we have today is brick guards. Brick guards actually designed to prevent more substantial amount of material from falling, and it also have a secondary function of helping prevent people from falling as well. And at the end, please remember that the principle of using guardrails, two-port and brick guards, they all can be applied to the edge of flat roofs, scaffolds and mobile towers. That's all for today. Thanks for watching and see you in the next lecture. Welcome back, my friends, in new lecture in this course, Controlling Workplace Hazards. We are still with work at height control measure. Today we are with the next point in our strategy, minimizing distance and the consequences of the fall. We agreed that if it's not possible to provide a safe work platform with safeguard or two-port or any alternative means of safe access, and the worker may fall from the height, then it will be necessary to provide some form of fall arrest. And the fall arrest comes in two main forms: the collective protection systems, such as safety nets and airbags, and also personal protective systems, such as fall arrest harness. So let's get a closer look of each form. The collective protection systems should be used because this will protect all workers who are working at height, not only who are working close to an open edge on a roof or any kind, also whether this worker is using PPE or not. For example, the safety nets which might be suspended underneath the open edge while the worker is doing his job on a roof place. It's also very important that all safety nets must be properly installed and secured by a competent person as much as possible below the roof. And of course, this is in order to minimize the distance fallen. The second form of the fall arrest is the personal fall arrest equipment, and it usually consists of a full body harness connected to one or two lanyards, and the lanyards is connected to an anchor point during the use. Also good to know that personal fall arrest equipment should be only used by a trained worker. Also harness, lanyards, and anchor points should be routinely inspected to ensure they are in a safe working order. The next point in this strategy is the head protection systems. Actually, construction and industrial sites almost have a risk of falling or moving objects, so they should be a mandatory hard hat areas, and this hard hat protects the worker from a severe head injury as a result of impact from a small object or being struck by a moving object. Next point in this step is training and instructions. All workers should be trained in order to work at height safely, and as a minimum, workers should be aware of hazards posed, such as the possible presence of fragile roofing materials or unprotected edges. Also, there are some trainings may be required by the law for the use of some equipment. For example, the workers who are erecting or modifying scaffolds, they all should be competent, and those who are driving or using mobile elevating work platform, they should have attended a recognized operator training course. Here we have covered the third strategy of the risk prevention of work at height, and I wish that each point is clearly discussed. Please also find the revision questions attached with this lecture. You can go through it to make sure that you understood everything successfully. Thanks for watching and see you in the next lecture. Hello and welcome back my friends in new lecture in our course Controlling Workplace Hazards. Today we jump to the next point in this section, studying different types of working platform for working at height. Before we have mentioned that the access equipment includes scaffolding, tower scaffolding, different platforms and ladders. And we also said if these equipments are not properly stable or secured, the risk will be increased. So here in this section we study in details the ways in which access equipment can become unstable and the control measures necessary for safe use. First thing you need to know that there are some common features in the work platform must be available, such as it should be sufficiently large to allow safe access, and it should be capable of bearing the loads imposed upon them, and also must be fully bordered to prevent gaps that could present tripping hazards or allow materials or people to fall through it. First work platform we have today is the suspended access equipment. It usually consists of a suspended cradle lowered into position from the above, and the cradle can be fully guarded with guardrails and two ports to provide safe work platform. But unfortunately in some instances it's not practicable to use this sort of equipment, so it may be necessary to use personal suspended access equipment, such as boots on a chair, which can be used for light short-term work, and on which the worker should be attached to the chair by a harness to prevent falls. Next point is ladders. And ladders are considered as a means of access and egress to the different work platform, so they are commonly used for the access into excavation and onto scaffolds. And ladders are really only suitable for short duration of work that allows the worker to maintain 3 points of contacts at all time. But bear in mind there are main hazards associated with the use of ladders, such as falls from height, like falling off the ladder or the ladder toppling side away or the ladder base slipping out from the wall. And maybe objects fall from the height, or maybe there is a contact with a live overhead facility like electric wires or cable. Next point is what are the safety precautions of using the ladders. First thing is ladders should be used as a means of access, not as a working platform. And it should be suitable for the task, and also it must be in a good condition. And don't site or handle it near a live overhead facility, but site it on a solid flat base so that the feet don't sink into the ground. And keep the angle of the ladder around 75 degrees to the horizontal plane, or make it a ratio of 1 to 4 distance away from the wall to the height, as shown in the picture. And as much as possible you have to make the ladder clean. And also nothing should be carried in the hands while using the ladders, so that both hands are free to grasp. Also the top of the ladder must rest against a solid support, and ideally it should be secured at the top. And it should extend far enough above the level of the working position, usually 3 steps. This is in order to provide access to provide a safe handhold. And for the wooden ladders, it shouldn't be painted as this can hide defects. And get to know that only one person should climb on the ladder at any one time. And the person must be using his PPE, especially his safety shoes, which must be in a very good condition, and of course his helmet. Last point in this lecture is step ladders. Like ladders, step ladders are intended for short duration and light works, and it almost have the same main hazard of ladders. And the safety precaution of the step ladders can be that you must ensure the ladders are fully opened and make sure that the locking devices are in place, and only use it on a firm level ground that it's not slippery, and don't work off the top 2 steps of the ladder unless there is a safe handhold on the steps, and you have to avoid the overreaching. Also, you have to carry out a daily check of the step ladder before using. Here is the end of this lecture. Please find the attached file with this lecture. It will help you to understand some points very successfully and clearly. Thanks for watching and see you in the next lecture. The standards rest on to prevent them from sinking into the ground. Next component is sole ports, which are large pieces of wood. We use it when the scaffold is erected on a soft ground, and we put it under the base plate to spread the load over a wide surface area. And of course the components of work platform, guardrails and 2 ports, which are all discussed earlier. Next point, we have to know that an independent tied scaffold is designed to carry its own weight and the full load of material and workers on the platform. So it must be tied to the building to give the stability and prevent movement. And actually there are a number of ways which the scaffold can be tied to the building to prevent movement. First way is by anchor bolts, where one end of the metal bolt is screwed into the wall of the building, while the other end is attached to the scaffold tubing. Second way is by through ties, where a scaffold tube extends into the building through an opening, like a window frame, while the end of the tube inside the building is coupled with another tube bridging across the opening. Or by a reveal ties, when a scaffold tube is coupled into a reveal pin that is wedged tightly across an opening such as a window reveal. Next way is by raker support that push the scaffold onto the building. But actually this system take up a space and may be not suitable in an urban environment. Then also by bracing. And bracing, as we discussed earlier, it's another important component of the scaffold, and it's used to stiffen the scaffold framework to prevent collapse of it. Last point in this lecture is factors that might cause the collapse of an independent tied scaffold. And it might be an overload to the work platform, or the scaffold itself built on a soft ground without use of adequate sole ports, or the scaffold is not tied adequately to the building, or standards are bent, buckled, or heavily corroded. And don't forget the weather condition like high winds, and incorrect couplers used to join tubes together. And it's so risky if the scaffold is erected by incompetent worker, and if the scaffold is not inspected prior to use. Here's the end of this lecture. Please find the attached file with this lecture. I wish you find it useful. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next lecture. Hello and welcome back, my friends, in new lecture in this course, Controlling Workplace Hazards. We are still with the different types of work platforms, and today we go to the next point about mobile tower scaffolds. Mobile tower scaffolds are often used for painting and maintenance jobs, and they are light-duty scaffolds, and their use should be restricted to light work only. And they have a working platform at the top, which is accessible by a ladder fitted internally. Also, it can be constructed using normal scaffolding tubes, and the whole structure is usually mounted on wheels so that we can move it easily. So as same as the previous different type of platforms, the main hazards associated with the mobile tower scaffolds are almost the same. So we have the falls from the work platform, objects falling from the platform, collapse of the structure, toppling of anybody walking on the platform, or also contact with alive overhead facilities like electrical cables. And for this type of working platform, we must consider the condition of the wheels. So any broken or failure or wrong movement of the wheels can lead to severe accidents. And for the safety precautions for safe use of the mobile tower scaffolds, it's almost the same of the previous cases of platforms. So the tower must not be overloaded, and it must be sited on a firm and level ground. Also, the tower must be built by trained workers, and the employer must provide safe instruction of using the mobile tower scaffolds. So the people shouldn't climb up the outside of the tower. And we should consider the rule of the outriggers, that it should be used where necessary to ensure the stability of the tower. And we have to plan very well to the task we are going to carry out, so we can know if we are going to be in contact with an overhead facility, to avoid all hazards associated with it. And as we discussed before, the guardrails and two ports must all be fitted to the work platform. And you must know that it's forbidden to move the tower while people or material on it, because really you cannot imagine when the tower collapses or the wheels break during moving and how much loss it can happen to whether people on tower or people on the ground near it. Next platforms we have is the mobile elevating work platforms. And actually they are motorized vehicles or trailers with powered extending arms, supporting a work cradle. And also they have the same hazards associated with the previous types of work platform. So we have falling from height, falling objects from height, collapse of the mobile elevating work platform, toppling of the platform, and the contact with the overhead facility. So automatically we almost have the same safety precaution like previous cases. It must be sited on a firm and stable ground, it must be away from overhead facility, and it must be not overloaded, and also health and safety instruction must be provided to all workers. And here we must use barriers around the mobile elevating work platform to prevent it being struck by vehicles or mobile plant. And it also acts to keep people out from underneath the cradle. And also guardrails and two ports must be used, and the vehicle must not be driven while the cradle raised unless specifically designed to do so. And it must be driven and operated by only trained and authorized staff only. So here we finished the discussion about different types of working platform. Last point we have in this lecture is about inspection of the access equipment. As we explained in the part 1 of this course, that it's a good management practice and usually a legal requirement to inspect the scaffold routinely. And the scaffolds should be inspected when they are first erected, and after any alteration of any element of it, and also after a major accident, like being struck by a vehicle, and also after a weather condition like high winds. And in general, it must be inspected periodically to make sure it's in a good condition. And during our inspection, we must inspect the condition of the tubes and the bracing, also the condition of the work platform and the edge protection used like guardrails and two ports. And don't forget the ground condition and the safe access, and also inspection of the electrical power components and wheels and outriggers. And after we are done with the inspection, details of these inspections should be carefully recorded, and it's particularly important that any defects noted are acted upon. And these inspections are not only for the working platform, but other work equipment used for work at height should be also inspected, like ladders, mobile towers, scaffolds, full body harness, lanyards, anchors point, and safety nets. So here we finally covered all points related to the section of working at height. I hope that all points are covered clearly. Please find the attached links with this lecture, and also you can find some revision question you have to answer to make sure that you understand all points clearly. Thanks for watching and see you in the next lecture. Hello and welcome back, my friends, in new lecture in this course, Controlling Workplace Hazards. Here we are with the last section in this element. Today we start with the point of the impact of the temporary works. Working sites where temporary works take place can become unsafe due to the presence and the use of machinery, vehicles, and electricity. So it includes the following types of work, such as short-term building projects, maintenance works, demolition, and excavations. And get to know that temporary works contain general examples of all hazards that can be found in any other workplaces. Also, there are few hazards that can be specific to a specific type of the temporary work. For example, like building maintenance and renovation works, it involves the use of hand tools and portable power tools, such as chainsaw and disc cutters. It also involves machinery, such as bench-mounted circular saws and cement mixers. And it also involves the use of vehicles, such as dumper trucks and forklift trucks. So here we will cover some of the hazards and control measures related to the specific type of equipment, which is the cement mixers, and also some other general control measures for the use of the work equipment. And we will later describe the hazards and controls relevant to hand tools and power tools and machinery in element number 4, which is work equipment hazards and risk control. So let's start with hazards associated with the cement mixers, which include the hazard of entanglement with rotating drum or internal blades, or the entrapment by the belt drive, and the hazard of inhalation of dry cement dust, and also wet cement dust, which is corrosive and may cause burns to the skin. And bear in mind that cement mixers are powered by diesel, which is resulting in risk of exposure to vapors and exhaust gases. And also consider the exposure to noise and vibrations, which are very critical and may lead to very harmful effects to health. So after we knew the hazards, we need automatically to ask the question of what are the available control measures needed when using the equipment? And actually, to answer this question, please take your time and please remember what you have learned from our first course. Go back to the steps of the control measures, and you need to relate your information to the practical field because, as we said before, in your practical field you may meet conditions, hazards, and risks for the first time. So your ideology is to relate the condition to the basic rule, and then for sure you will find the solution very easy. So for the control measures needed when using this equipment, our management should ensure that first of all, this equipment is suitable for the task and it's in a very good condition. Also, we must ensure that the use is restricted to the competent operators only, and we should provide information, instruction, and the training. Also, the equipment, we must ensure that it's inspected and maintained in a safe condition. And we also must ensure that an appropriate guards and devices are fitted and used. And we must ensure that the appropriate PPE is used at all times. Second point in this lecture is related to the hazards and control measures of vehicles. And actually in the element number 2, transport hazards and risk control, it will contain more specific information on transport hazards. But here we will briefly consider some hazards arising from the use of the two examples of vehicles used in the temporary works, which are forklift trucks and dumper trucks. And also we will know the appropriate control measures. So let's start with some general hazards of the forklift truck, which can be the collision hazard, whether with structures or pedestrians, and poor or limited visibility, especially when reversing operation. Also consider the noise and vibrations. As we mentioned before, they are very critical and may lead to very harmful effects. And also consider the overturning hazard. Next example is the dumper truck hazard, which are similar to the hazards of the forklift trucks. So we have the hazard of collision, also whether with structures or pedestrians, and the overturning on slopes or the age of the excavations, and the consideration of the poor maintenance of the equipment, also the unauthorized use. Please remember again that these hazards are not all the hazards of these two examples, and there can be more and more hazards. But as I said that here we will briefly consider some hazards only, and in the element number 2, it will contain more specific information. So getting to the next point about the control measures needed, and actually for this case we need to start with the good planning. Because good planning means that the site is carefully designed and laid out to allow safe movement of pedestrians and vehicles around the workplace. And the designated pedestrian, walkways and vehicles routes are provided with appropriate marking, barriers, signage and lighting for each. And we must ensure that vehicles are suitable for the task they carry out, and they are inspected and maintained in a very safe working order. And also we must ensure that our drivers are appropriately qualified and they are medically fit to the job. And we must provide them with information, instructions, training, and supervision. In fact, the supervision of vehicles movement is critical on the building sites. Also, the banksman should be used whenever vehicles are moving in the areas, or while they are reversing. So the banksman is the person who gives direction to driver or operator, who for some reason cannot fully see. For example, the banksman might direct an excavator operator while digging a trench, or a crane operator during a lifting operation. Also a vehicle's driver during a reversing operation. Here's the end of this lecture. I hope everything are clear. Thanks for watching and see you in the next lecture. Hello and welcome back, my friends, in new lecture in this course, Controlling Workplace Hazards. Last lecture we spoke about maintenance, renovation and work equipments, and briefly discussed vehicles, hazards and control measures. And now we go to the next point, which is the site security. We agreed that building sites and areas of maintenance and renovation are inherently dangerous places, as they are considered places where unauthorized visitors can access to. And such visitors can be any member of the public taking shortcut, also maybe a public way going through the site, or even a curious person or children drawn by curiosity. And of course we should mention thieves who are entering to steal plant or equipment or even a raw material. So the good site security is therefore important, especially when the site is in an urban area. So in order to achieve good site security, we have to set our control measures against unauthorized access. And this can be done by using fencing and warning signs. Also secure gates at all site access points. And we must have security staff, perhaps 24 hours cover. And we must provide good lighting on the site and on the fence. Also we must use cameras and site alarm. And to protect properties from robbery, we must secure all portable equipment in locked storage. And we must be prepared even in case an unauthorized person could access the site. So we must remove ladders from all scaffolds and securing all chemicals in locked storage. Also we must secure all mobile plants and lock vehicles and remove the keys. And we must cover all barrier of excavations. And for the issue of curious children, it can be useful to liaise with schools to promote safety behavior. And where there is a public right of way through the site, then we must barrier and decide the pedestrian route. Please bear in mind that the site security is a very critical point, and you must deal with it seriously. So don't consider it as if it's known by normal, or saying who would access to a building site to put his life on the line, or who is that man who will see a building site and he will walk through it. And remember that we said that this can be a public way through the site, and if you think so, think even that this person is blind and he can't realize the nature of the area. So can you imagine a blind man walking through a building site? Can you imagine what will be the disasters? The worst case, this man will fall dead. And you must know that the law says you must conduct your business without putting members of the public at risk. And the project client should provide information about boundaries, access, and measures to exclude unauthorized persons. So please again, deal with this point seriously. Next point is electricity. Here we will briefly consider some hazards and control measures for working with electrical system. And later in element number 5, electrical safety, we will get more specific information about electricity. So first thing you need to know that temporary works such as building, maintenance and renovation often bring workers close to the electrical distribution systems. And actually there are two main ways in which electrical shock accident can occur, such as contact with the overhead power lines and also the contact with the period surfaces. So our possible control measures briefly can be ensuring that the site electrical distribution system are designed to be suitable for the purpose and the site environment. And it also be designed and installed by the competent electrician. And it must be protected from physical damage. And we must provide various protective systems, such as fuse, earthing, low voltage and residual current devices. Also, we must conduct formal visual inspection and testing for the portable electrical equipment used in the working site. Last point in this lecture is the demolition works. The demolition work involves knocking down building to clear ground, and it also includes smaller works in maintenance and renovation, such as dismantling of parts of the structure, like steel-framed building. So the hazards associated with the demolition work are very similar to those in other types of building work. And the typical hazards include the collapse of the structure and all other hazards related to the work at height, as we discussed before, and being in contact with the live electrical power lines. And also we must consider the plant and the machinery and all movement of vehicles in the work site. Also explosions that may happen in the working site if there any source of the explosion, such as the gas pipelines. Also there are some hazards related to the health of the worker directly, such as inhalation of asbestos and dust, and noise also and vibrations. And biological hazards may be found in the working site from the stagnant water, and sharp objects from the demolition process like glass and nails, and the manual handling hazards, which will be discussed later in the next following chapters. So now after we have learned all hazards associated with the demolition process, we have to know the typical control measures to it. So control measures can include the specific assessment and the good planning of the work to eliminate hazards as much as possible, and this can be done by selecting a suitable demolition method that keeps worker away from the immediate area. Also the control measures for working at height, as we discussed earlier in this chapter. And we must have the structure survey to assess the strength and the stability of the structure, and also to know the strength and the stability of the floor to ensure that the machinery placed on them don't exceed the floor's tolerance. And before starting the work, we must disconnect all the surfaces in the building like gas, electricity and water. And we must keen on the removal and disposal of any hazardous material found in the work site like the asbestos. Also all methods of the site security as we discussed earlier, and if possible and it can be better to evacuate building around the demolition site. And of course the demolition process must be done only by the competent workers, that they are aware of all hazards related to this process and they have the adequate training. And also all workers must be provided with the proper PPE. Here's the end of this lecture. I wish everything are discussed clearly. Thanks for watching and see you in the next lecture. Hello and welcome back my friends in new lecture in this course Controlling Workplace Hazards. Finally we are with the last point in this section of the impact of the temporary works, and at the same time it's the last lecture of the element 1 workplace hazard and risk control. So let's start with the final point about the excavation works, and you must know that every year people are killed or seriously injured by the collapse and falling materials while working in excavations. Also the law say that you must prevent danger to workers in or near excavations, and also no work should take place until the excavation is safe. So getting to know the hazards of excavation work, which include the collapse hazard, that when unsupported sides of the excavation slip and cave in, there is a severe crush. Injuries can result from even small collapses, and this is because the soil is very heavy, and also workers buried or entrapped in the soil, they can asphyxiate in minutes. Second hazard is striking buried surfaces, and buried surfaces can be the high voltage electrical cables or gas pipes or also water pipes. So striking buried surfaces during the excavation work can lead to disasters such as electric arcing, electric shock or burns and fire, or also gas explosions. Next hazards are slightly related to the work at height hazards, and as we spoke previously in this element that work at height can be while being beneath ground like tunnels and excavations. So once we start digging the ground for a certain depth, this depth is representing the height of the excavation. So there is a hazard of people falling into the excavation from unfenced edge, or also while climbing into or out the excavation excavation from ladders. And also the hazard of the falling object, that when tools and materials fall from unprotected edge into the excavation. Next point is flooding hazard, which can be from the surface water during heavy rains or groundwater or even water pipe buried in the ground. Next hazard is the presence of hazardous substance in the excavation, and such substances can be like gas and vapors, and if they are heavier than air, and if they fill the excavation, it will actually act as a source of exhaust fumes. So excavations might need to be classified as confined space for this reason. Next hazard is the collapse of the adjacent structures, that if foundation of near building are disturbed, this can result in the collapse of the structure. So now then we are aware about hazards associated with excavations. Next point is to know the control measures against different hazards, and you will find that each hazard has his own control measures. So for the prevention of the collapse hazard, the collapse of the sides of the excavation can be prevented by many ways, such as the patterning method, at which the sides of the excavation is sloped at angle that the sides are at self-supporting and sufficiently shallow so soil will not slip. Next method is the pinching method, in which the excavation is cut in a series of steps, and each step should not be deeper than 1.5 meters, and it must be cut enough to guarantee that even if the top level is to collapse, it will not fall into the bottom of the excavation. Third option is the shoring method, and simply it's holding up the sides of the excavation to prevent it from collapsing. And also there are many methods of shoring, such as using metal or timber that is fixed inside the excavation. Next method is the trench box, and it's simply holding up the side of the excavation by temporary support such as the metal box. And get to know that each type of protection method used will vary depending on many factors like the type of substrate that is being excavated, and how much time the excavation will be opened for. Also the type of work will be carried out in the excavation. Also depth and groundwater condition are very important factors in the excavation. And finally the number of people that will work in the excavation. Next control measure we have is for preventing people from falling into the excavation. And this can be done simply by using barriers, such as guardrails and 2 ports, as we discussed earlier. Also good lighting, especially at the edge of the excavation, must be provided. And for long excavations, crossing points such as bridges must be provided. And we must make sure that the access to the excavation is achieved by properly positioned and secured ladders. Next control measures are for preventing materials and vehicles from falling. So it can be simply achieved by maintaining a safe distance from the sides of the excavations. For example, heaps should be positioned in a safe distance from the excavation sites, and we should prevent vehicles from approaching the excavation sites. Also stop barriers should be positioned to prevent vehicles from rolling in, and for unsupported excavations, vehicles movement close to it must be minimized. And of course, it's our responsibility to provide all workers with the safety instructions and the training. And workers must use the provided PPE, such as the wearing hard hats to protect themselves from falling objects. Next point is the prevention of striking buried surfaces. And it can be achieved by the good planning of the work and good planning of the area of the excavation. Then we can know the exact position of the buried surfaces. And also buried surfaces can be located using the detection equipment, as there are various devices can be used to detect different types of surfaces, such as metal detectors and cable detectors. It's highly recommended that the buried surfaces should be uncovered by careful digging by hand. And the exposed surfaces should be identified and clearly labeled, so that their position is easily seen. And bear in mind that the risk assessment and the safe system of work will need to be developed, so the permit to work and permit to enter the excavation will be necessary. Last point in this chapter that you must know, it's essential that excavations must be inspected routinely to ensure that they are in a safe condition. And of course, it must be inspected by the competent person, and the inspection will be before the start of every work shift and after any accidental fall of material, and also after any event likely to affect the strength and the stability of the excavations. And all records of these inspections should be kept on the site. So finally we are done with this chapter. I hope that everything are clear. Please find attached files, it will be very useful to you. Thanks for watching and see you in the next lecture. Hello and welcome back my friends in new lecture in this course Controlling Workplace Hazards. Today we started a new element, safe movement of vehicles in the workplace. This element is quite short but it includes very important information and cases that you might face in your workplace. Vehicle accidents are responsible for many serious and fatal injuries and also cause a significant amount of property and equipment damage in the workplace. And when vehicles move around in the workplace, they represent a hazard to vehicle's driver as well as pedestrians and other drivers and passengers. And hazards related to the vehicle movement in the workplace include the following. First hazard is the driving too fast. Often it's associated with the driver error, and it's a major cause of vehicle collision and overturning. And the effects can become worse when the vehicle moves across uneven ground or around bends that cause the load to fall, and even brakes will be ineffective if the floor is wet or slippery. Next point is the reversing hazard. Actually, this operation is very critical as it limits the driver's vision and make the whole length of the vehicle in the direction of the travel. So without the rear vision device, the driver's vision may be impaired, and without the reversing alarm, all pedestrians may not see or hear the approach of the reversing vehicle. Next point is the hazard of operating quiet or silent machinery. Although it's a good characteristic of machine to be low noise, it may represent a hazard that machines like loaders, cranes, when they are quiet, the pedestrians or drivers may not hear and recognize the existence of it. Another hazard we have is related to the poor visibility, and poor visibility is especially found around loads, wide or long vehicles or while reversing as we mentioned earlier, and it's considered as a main reason of a great number of the collision accidents. Next point is the non-movement related hazards. In fact, vehicles do not only present a hazard when they are moving, and some vehicles hazards occur when other types of activity are being carried out on the vehicle. For example, the loading and unloading process says that both manual and mechanical loading and unloading of vehicles can create risk, such as the manual handling risk associated with the lifting boxes into the back of the lorry, also the tipping operation that can result in the vehicles overturning. Next point is the securing and sheeting activity, that when workers have to climb onto the vehicle in order to secure the load by sheeting over the load to prevent it from blowing out when moving at speed. Also when the workers have to climb onto the top of the road tanker to close the hatches, so there will be work at height risk. Next point is the coupling activity, that when vehicles are attached to trailers or other towed equipment. Also maintenance and work activity, that when mechanics have to access various parts of the vehicle and may have to work at height or under the vehicle. So here's the end of this lecture. I hope everything are clear. Thanks for watching and see you in the next lecture. Hello and welcome back my friends, in new lecture in this course, Controlling Workplace Hazards. Today we continue with the transport hazards and risk control. So next point we have is the typical risks associated with the vehicle's operation, and this point contains two main points, which are the loss of the control point and the collision point. There are many reasons for losing control, such as a human error or environmental condition or mechanical failure in the vehicle. And depending on the type of the vehicle being driven, this loss of control may result in skid, collisions or overturn of the vehicle. And also for some vehicles, because of their design, they are more likely to overturn than others. For example, the forklift trucks, which have a very short and narrow wheelbase, and also the dumper trucks, they are frequently involved in the overturning accident. But the question is, are only design and environment the only factors that may cause the forklift to overturn? Actually, there are many factors that may cause a forklift to overturn. For example, driving around corners too quickly, or unstable loads on the fork, and the floor condition, is it wet or dry? Also driving on uneven surface, or driving with the load elevated, especially when going around corners. And of course the tire pressure and the braking system, and also collision, especially with curbs. Next main point we have is the collision point. Collisions can occur between vehicles and other vehicles or pedestrians, or also fixed objects such as support leg of the racking in a warehouse. And in the workplace you will find areas that must have a particular concern. And these areas of the building tend to have a high incidence of vehicles collision rate. For example, the entrance and exit points. They are considered one of the areas of the concern in the building, because of they have a concentration of vehicles through these routes, and also the presence of the blind spots or change in the light levels that may occur. And remember that some of the highest risk situations occur when pedestrians have to interact with vehicles, and any collision between a vehicle and a pedestrian is likely to lead to serious or fatal injury. Last point in this lecture is factors that increase the risk of vehicles collision. And these factors can be driving too fast, or environmental conditions such as inadequate lighting or bad weather conditions, also reversing without the help of a banksman, or blind spots such as corners and entrances. And it can be poor design of pedestrians, walkways and crossing points, also the vehicle's condition of maintenance or tire pressure, and the factor of obstructed visibility of the driver. So here's the end of this lecture. Now we have covered all hazards related to the vehicle's operation. I wish everything is clear. Thanks for watching and see you in the next lecture. Hello and welcome back my friends, in new lecture in this course, Controlling Workplace Hazards. Today we continue with the control measures for safe workplace transport operations. The measures necessary to control the risks created by vehicle operations can be grouped into three main categories: the safe site, safe vehicles and safe drivers. And actually these strategies are based basically on the health and safety management principles as we discussed in the first course. So let's start each point in further details, starting with the safe site workplace environment. Careful design and construction of the workplace can eliminate or reduce the risks created by vehicles operations. And there are many factors we have to consider, such as vehicle and pedestrian zone. Since pedestrians are usually the group at greatest risk during vehicle operations, it may be possible to eliminate them from certain parts of the workplace, and also by creating a pedestrians only areas. Next factor is the vehicle traffic route layout, that the good design of roads and routes can be used to keep vehicles at a distance from pedestrian walkways and other vehicles. And the using of one-way direction systems will be effective methods to reduce the risk of collisions between vehicles. And wherever possible, segregation of vehicles and pedestrians should be provided with a separate walkways. Also, crossing points may be implemented in the workplace to allow pedestrians to cross traffic routes safely. Also, we have to separate site and building entrances so that the vehicles and pedestrians are not forced to be close at these busy areas. And of course, we have to use the appropriate warning signs to alert vehicle drivers to hazard on their route. And also it may be necessary to place barriers on the route to provide additional physical protection to pedestrians. And where barriers cannot be used, the segregation might be achieved by marking pedestrian walkway on the floor. And also get to know that barriers not only protect pedestrians from vehicles, but it can also be used to protect structures that might be at risk of damage or collapse in the event of collision. And there are some environmental considerations should be taken into account, such as the good standard of lighting, the good visibility, and the good surface of the traffic route. Second control measure group necessary to control risks is creating safe vehicles. There are many types of vehicles used in the workplace, like cars, lorries, trucks. However, some basic principles can be applied, such as the vehicle must be suitable for intended use, such as trucks that are being used to transport marble stones, because these trucks are designed to withstand this load. And also like transporting workers in buses rather than lorries. And we have to guarantee that the vehicle is suitable for the environment, like trucks that are used in the desert differ from that used in snow or mines, that each type is designed to work in a specific environment. And also the vehicle must be maintained in a safe working order, and it must be driven only by trained and qualified driver. And of course course, it must be inspected routinely before the use. There are some other points that the vehicle must be fitted with, that it must include a seat with a seat belt to the driver. Also, it must include a guard to protect the driver in the event of falling objects. Also, the vehicle must include a horn and visibility aids such as cameras and mirrors. And it must include audible reversing alarm to warn pedestrians, and it must include beacon or flashing lights to warn of an approaching vehicle. Please take into your account that all vehicles used, whether on public roads or in a private site, both must meet the legal standards, and the risk assessment has to be issued and completed for all issues related to the vehicles. And as we discussed in the first course about health and safety management system, that it may be required to initiate a routine or pre-use inspection to equipment in the workplace. So here in this case, the following points should be checked at the beginning of each shift. So our checklist will include the tire pressure and the condition, parking and service brakes, steering system, also fuel, oil and water system for leaks, and make sure that batteries are charged, and also lifting and tilting system, including hydraulics, are working and are leak-free. And also make sure that audible warning and lights and mirrors are in a good condition, and also the seat belt. And we have to make sure that forks are not damaged or cracked, and for any defects found, it all should be reported to the supervisors for the immediate action. Third group we have is creating a safe driver. And since vehicles are usually under the control of the driver, it's essentially that the driver is carefully selected, trained and supervised. So he must have to be trained and assessed to achieve the qualification, and he must also have the proof of qualification such as the driving license, and his license may have to be checked periodically to ensure that the driver doesn't have undisclosed penalties or disqualification for the road traffic offenses. Also, the driver must be in a good medical condition, that no medical diseases that will impair his ability to drive, such as diabetes or unstable blood pressure, as they may cause him a sudden coma while driving. And we have to provide the driver with a specific information, instruction and training about the workplace and the site where he will drive in. And also it's our responsibility to provide the supervision to ensure that they follow the safe system of work and they obey the site rules. Last point in this lecture is the risk assessment. Good to know that all control measures we mentioned will be summarized after the completion of the risk assessment, because as we mentioned earlier, we are working according to the health and safety management principles. So firstly, we need to identify the various hazards by establishing the vehicle operations taking place in the workplace and the types of the accidents that may occur. Then we have to identify the groups at risk, such as pedestrians or the drivers or other drivers. Then we have to evaluate the risk by considering the existing controls and decide if further controls are required to reduce the risk. Then all findings must be reported and subjected to the review process. So here we finally finished this element and our course is entirely covered. Please find the attached files with this lecture, and at the end of each element I have attached some solved questions of the previous Nebosh tests. You will need to check it and train yourself. And if you are preparing for the Nebosh exam, you can find my course about the Nebosh exam preparation, that it might help you as it shows you how to answer questions and all exam skills. And last thing, if you find this course useful, I will be grateful if you leave a review, whether about strong or weak points. This will help me to improve my work. And please, if you need any help or have any question regarding this course, please don't hesitate to message me. Thanks for watching my course, and see you in the next courses. Hello and welcome back, my friends. So long time, but finally we are here again. We are today with the second Nebosh course, International Fire Safety. And first of all, thanks for everyone who reviewed my first course, and because of all of you, my course became the best rate on Udemy. So let's start introduction about the International Fire Safety course. This course consists of two parts. The first part is the health and safety management system, which we already covered in the first course. And the second part is for the fire safety. And we are going to study the second part, as there is no need to repeat the first part, and we already covered it before. So for any new students want to enroll in this course, I recommend you to enroll in the first course first before you enroll in this course, so you can cover all points and be able to gain maximum knowledge. In this course, we are going to talk about how fire starts and the chemistry of fire, the fire risk assessment and the fire growth and spreading, and also the effect of fire on the environment. And a lot of important points we are going to discover together, so hurry up and join us now. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next lesson. Hello and welcome back, my friends. So long time, but finally we are here again. We are today with the second Nebosh course, International Fire Safety. And first of all, thanks for everyone who reviewed my first course, and because of all of you, my course became the best rate on Udemy. So let's start introduction about the International Fire Safety course. This course consists of two parts. The first part is the health and safety management system, which we already covered in the first course. And the second part is for the fire safety. And we are going to study the second part, as there is no need to repeat the first part, and we already covered it before. So for any new students want to enroll in this course, I recommend you to enroll in the first course first before you enroll in this course, so you can cover all points and be able to gain maximum knowledge. In this course, we are going to talk about how fire starts and the chemistry of fire, the fire risk assessment and the fire growth and spreading, and also the effect of fire on the environment. And a lot of important points we are going to discover together, so hurry up and join us now. Thanks for watching and see you in the next lesson. Hello and welcome back with a new lecture in another chapter in our course. Today this chapter discusses the fire protection in buildings, and you have to know that the design, construction, layout and furnishing of building has a key role to play in any fire safety management strategy. Also the building and how it's furnished has a huge impact upon not only whether a fire is likely to start given the furnishings within, but also if the building itself can withstand a fire long enough for persons to safely escape in the event of fire. So you shall know that the preventive and protective measures that will protect persons in the event of a fire fall into two categories, referred as passive and active protection. For passive fire protection, it's based on the principle of containment, as the compartments of the building are constructed so that if a fire should occur, it will be restricted to one area. For example, fire doors should prevent the spread of smoke and flames from lobbies, stairwells, and lift shafts. Also, the design of escape routes, which should not incorporate combustible wall, ceiling, or floor linings. Also, doors and shutters in compartment walls should be able to withstand the effect of the fire for the same period of time as the walls themselves. While the active fire protection systems may detect or extinguish a fire with a water sprinkler or inert gas flooding installation performing both functions. Also, an automatic fire detection installation will detect the heat or combustion products of a fire in its early stages and raise the alarm. And bear in mind that neither passive nor active fire protection measures can be installed and then forgotten. They require regular inspection and maintenance, and the fire safety manager should also ensure that regular inspections are made of escape routes and fire doors and housekeeping standards, and that suitable records of such inspections are kept. Hello and welcome back to the new chapter in this course. Today we start a discussion about the causes and prevention of fire. Last chapter we could identify the sources of fuel, ignition and oxygen, and this of course will assist in preparing a safety management strategy based upon a risk assessment approach. And determining the different causes of fire in the workplace will be the next stage in the management process. Also identifying the primary sources of harm and how they are caused, all this will enable a good fire safety management plan to be produced, all this to prevent the fire starting. So this chapter will include a specific reference to causes of fire within a construction and maintenance work with the inherent hazards and risk, and also the preventive steps to manage them. So this chapter discusses the following key elements: the common causes of major fires, fire risks associated with the flammable substances, and fire risks associated with common workplaces, processes and activities, also arson and measures to prevent fires. That was a quick introduction about this chapter. Thanks for watching and see you in the next lesson. Management of health and safety in the construction industry is more important now than it has ever been. Do you know that approximately 2.2 million people work in the UK construction industry, and that's making it the country's biggest industry as the number of construction projects has grown over the last decade. Also, the labor force changing as more and more migrant workers join the industry. Nevertheless, the fatal accident rate remains over 4 times the average for all other UK industries and remains one of the largest contributors to worker fatalities for any sector. So briefly, this chapter covers the scope and nature of the construction activities along with moral, legal and financial consequences of failing to manage health and safety in the construction industry. The construction industry covers a wide range of activities, ranging from large-scale civil engineering projects to very small house extension projects. And it's very common in this industry to use subcontractors. And over many years, the construction industry has had a poor but improving health and safety record. So in this chapter, we will explain the factors which should be considered when carrying out an initial assessment of the site to identify significant hazards and risk. Then identify health, welfare, and work environment requirements on construction sites. We will explain the hazards and appropriate control measures for violence at work. Then we will explain the hazards and appropriate control measures for substance misuse at work. Then the last point, we will explain the hazards associated with the movement of people on construction sites. The safe movement of vehicles in the workplace is essential if accidents are to be avoided. But do you know, the more serious accidents between pedestrians and vehicles can often be traced back to excessive speed or other unsafe vehicle practices, as more and more workers drive vehicles on public highways as a part of their jobs, so many of the risks associated with these hazards can be significantly reduced by an effective management system. Therefore, in this chapter, we are going to explain the hazards and control measures for the safe movement of vehicles within a construction environment. Then outline the factors associated with driving at work that increase the risk of an incident. And finally, outline the control measures to reduce work-related driving risks. Until a few years ago, accidents caused by the manual handling of loads were the largest single cause of over 3-day accidents reported to the HSE in UK. And accidents due to poor manual handling techniques still account for over 25% of all reported accidents and in some occupational sectors. Therefore, this chapter explains work processes and practices that may contribute to musculoskeletal disorders, work-related upper limb disorders, and their appropriate control measures. It explains the hazards and control measures which should be considered when assessing risks from manual handling activities. Also, it explains the hazards and control measures to reduce the risk in the use of lifting and moving equipment with specific reference to manual and mechanically operated load moving equipment. Any equipment used by an employee at work is generally covered by the term work equipment. And actually this scope is extremely wide and includes hand tools, power tools, ladders, photocopiers, lifting equipment, forklift trucks, and motor vehicles. And when we say any equipment used, that means starting or stopping the equipment, repairing, modifying, maintaining, servicing, cleaning, and transporting. So in this chapter we are going to outline general requirements for the work equipment, outline the hazards and control measures for powered and non-powered handheld tools, describe the main mechanical and non-mechanical hazards of machinery, and finally explain the main control measures for reducing risk from common construction machinery hazards. Electricity is widely used in every factory, workshop, laboratory, and office in the country. Any use of electricity has the potential to be very hazardous with the possible fatal results. So legislation has been in place for many years to control and regulate the use of electrical energy and activities associated with it, as it provides a framework for the standards required in the design, installation, maintenance, and the use of electrical equipment and systems and the supervision of these activities to minimize the risk of energy. Quick statistical data in the UK, which has approximately 2% of all fatalities at work, are caused by electrical shock, and over the last few years there have been 378 electrical accidents each year. In addition to 25 people died of their injury, and the majority of the fatalities in agriculture, extractive, and utility supply, while the majority of the major accidents happen in the manufacturing, construction, and service industries. The objective of this chapter is to outline the principles, hazards, and risks associated with the use of electricity in the workplace, and outline the control measures that should be taken when working with electrical systems or using electrical equipment. Also outline the control measures to be taken when working near or underneath overhead power lines. Occupational health, unlike occupational safety, since it's generally more concerned with probabilities than certainties, and it's as important as occupational safety, but unfortunately it receives less attention from managers. But can you imagine every year twice as many people suffer ill health by the workplace than suffer workplace injury? And although diseases like respiratory disease, hearing problems, asthmatic conditions, and back pain do not usually kill people, they can lead to many years of discomfort and pain. Furthermore, it has been estimated in the UK that 30% of all cancers probably have an occupational link, which is known for 38% of cancer cases. Also, occupational exposure to fumes, dust, and chemicals in various forms account for around 4,000 deaths a year, and some 38,000 individuals suffer breathing or lung problems, possibly caused by their work. This chapter outlines the forms of classification and the health risks from exposure to hazardous substances, explain the factors to be considered when undertaking assessment of the health risks, explain the use and limitations of the workplace exposure limits, and outline control measures that should be used to reduce the risk of ill health from exposure, and outline the hazards and risks and controls associated with specific agents, and finally outline the basic requirements related to the safe handling and storage of waste on construction sites. The occupational health is concerned with physical and psychological hazards as well as chemical and biological hazards. The physical hazards include topics like electricity, display screen equipment, manual handling, which were covered in earlier chapters, and noise, vibration, and radiation, which are discussed in this chapter. And however, it's only really in the last 20 years that psychological hazards have been included among the occupational health hazards faced by many workers. And it's now the most rapidly expanding area of occupational health and includes topics like mental health, workplace stress, and violence to staff and substance abuse. In this chapter, we outline the health effects associated with exposure to noise and control measures, the health effects associated with exposure exposure to vibration and control measures. Also outline the health effects associated with ionizing and non-ionizing radiation and its control measures, and outline the cause and effects of the work-related stress and the appropriate control measures. Each year, work at height accounts for about 50 to 60 deaths and more than any other workplace activity. Also 4,000 injuries and over 200 painters and decorators are seriously injured as a result of fall from height. A lot of attempts have been made to address these concerns by the introduction of work at height regulations, which apply to all operations carried out at height, not only just construction work. Such operations like window cleaning, tree surgery, maintenance work at height, and the changing of street lamps. In this chapter, we explain the hazards of working at height and outline the precautions necessary to control them, and explain safe working practices for access equipment and roof work, then outline the control measures necessary to protect other persons not involved in the work at height, and outline the particular control measures to reduce risk when working over or near the water. Excavation work is an essential part of the construction process and one of the most hazardous, as building foundations and the installation of drainage, sewage, and other services require trenches to be excavated. And because it's a hazardous operation, several people are killed or seriously injured each year while working in excavations by excavation wall collapses and falls of materials and contact with period surfaces. This chapter explains the hazards and risk assessment of excavation work and its control measures, and also explain the hazards associated with confined space working and outline the control measures. Demolition is one of the most hazardous construction operations and is responsible for more death and major injuries than any other activity. And it requires a written plan to show how danger will be prevented, and all demolition work must be carried out to minimize the risks to employees and others who may be affected by the work. In this chapter, we identify the main hazards of demolition and deconstruction work and also outline the control measures for them.